Thanks for the beautiful, beautiful weekend in Omaha. I'm Micah Sale from New York City with a question for Warren and Charlie about what makes a company's price-earnings ratio move up relative to other companies in its industry. How can we, as investors, find company and even industries that will grow their relative price-earnings ratios as well as their earnings? And thank you for the wonderful weekend and for sharing your brilliance with the shareholders.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
It's very simple that relative price-earnings ratios move up because people expect either the industry or the company's prospects to be better relative to all other securities than they have been than their preceding view, and that can turn out to be justified or otherwise. Absolute price-earnings ratios move up in respect to the earning power of, or the prospective earning power of that is viewed by the investing public of future returns on equity, and also in response to changes in interest rates. And in the recent, well, really ever since 1982, but accentuated in recent years, you've had decreasing interest rates pushing up stocks in aggregate, and you've had an increase in corporate profits. Return on equity of American businesses improved dramatically recently, and that also, and people are starting to believe it. So that has pushed up absolute price-earnings ratios. And then within that universe of all stocks, when people get more enthusiastic about a specific business or a specific industry, they will push up the relative PE ratio for that stock or industry. Charlie, you've got anything?
Yes, I think he also asked, how do you forecast these improvements in price-earnings ratios?
That's your part of the question.
Around here, I would say that if our predictions have been a little better than other people's, it's because we tried to make fewer of them.
We also try not to do anything difficult, which ties in with that. We really do feel that you get paid just as well. You know, this is not like Olympic diving. In Olympic diving, you know, they have a degree of difficulty factor, and if you can do some very difficult dive, the payoff is greater if you do it well than if you do some very simple dive. That's not true in investments. You get paid just as well for the most simple dive as long as you execute it all right. And so we look for 1 foot bars to step over rather than 7 foot or 8 foot bars to try and set some Olympic record by jumping over. And it's very nice because you get paid just as well for the 1 foot bars. Okay, zone 2.
Good morning. My name is Joe Lacey. I'm from Austin, Texas. In this era, when the financial departments of the institutions of higher learning are referring to you as an anomaly, and they preach the efficient markets hypothesis, stating that you can't outperform the market, where does one go to find a mentor like you found in Ben Graham, someone you can ask questions to regarding value investing?
My understanding is that the University of Florida has instituted a couple of courses that actually Mason Hawkins gave them a significant amount of money to finance, and I believe they're teaching something other than efficient markets there. There's a very good course at Columbia, I know, that it gets a lot of visiting teachers to come in. I go in there and teach occasionally, but a number of practitioners. I think the efficient market theory is less wholly writ now than it was 15 or 20 years ago, and I recommend, you know, looking into those 2 schools. It's really quite useful if you had a merchant shipping business. If all of your competitors believe the world is flat, you know, it is a huge edge, because they will not take on any cargo to go to places that are beyond where they think they will fall off. And so we should be encouraging the teaching of efficient market theories in universities, and it amazes me. But what happens is that you spend years getting your PhD in finance, and you learn theories with a lot of mathematics in them that the average layman can't can't do, and you become sort of a high priest, and you get an enormous amount of yourself and ego and even professional security invested in those ideas, and it gets very hard to back off after a given point. And I think that to some extent has contaminated the teaching of investing in the universities. Charlie?
Well, I would argue that the contamination was massive. But it's waning.
Yeah, it is waning.
It's waning. The good ideas eventually triumph.
Yeah. The word anomaly I've always found interesting on that, because after a while, I mean, Columbus was an anomaly, but what it means is something that the academicians could not explain, and rather than re-examine their theories, they simply discarded any evidence of that sort as anomalous. And I think when you find information that contradicts previously cherished beliefs, that you've got a special obligation to look at it, and look at it quickly. I think Charlie told me that one of the things Darwin did was that whenever he found anything that contradicted some previous belief, he knew that he had to write it down almost immediately, because he felt that the human mind was so conditioned to reject contradictory evidence that unless he got it down in black and white very quickly, his mind would simply push it out of existence. Charlie knows more about Darwin than I do. Maybe he can explain that.
Well, I don't know about Darwin, but I did find it amusing. One of these extreme efficient market theorists explained Warren for many, many years as an anomaly of luck. And he got to 6 sigmas, 6 standard deviations of luck. And then people started laughing at him, because six sigmas of luck is a lot. So he changed his theory. Now, see,
I'd rather have the 6 sigmas of luck, actually.
The one thing he couldn't bear to leave was his 6 sigmas.
Let's try zone 3.
My name is Warren Hayes. I'm from Chicago, Illinois. I understand from various publications like Outstanding Investor Digest that many of the best value investors are buying high-quality, multinational Japanese companies that are trading below net working capital value. Do you agree that these values exist in Japan, and would you consider the purchase value?
I read the Outstanding Investors Digest, OID, and it's a very good publication. And I have read some of the commentary about Japanese securities. We've looked at securities in all major markets, and we certainly looked at them in Japan, particularly in recent years when the Nikkei has so underperformed the S&P here. We're quite a bit less enthused about those stocks as being any kind of obvious bargains than the people that you read about in OID. The returns on equity in most areas of Japanese business, returns on equity are very, very low, and it's extremely difficult to get rich by being the owner of a business that earns a low return on equity. We always look at what a business does in terms of what it earns on capital. We want to be in good businesses. What we really want to be is in businesses that are going to be good businesses and better businesses 10 years from now. And we want to buy them at a reasonable price. But many years ago, we gave up what I've labeled the cigar butt approach to investing, which is where you try and find a really kind of pathetic company, but it sells so cheap that you think there's one good free puff left in it. We used to pick up a lot of soggy cigar butts. I mean, I had a portfolio full of them. But those are the companies that had low returns on equity. And if you have a business that's earning 5 or 6% on equity, and you hold it for a long time, you are not going to do well in investing, even if you buy it cheap to start with. Time is the enemy of the poor business, and it's the friend of the great business. I mean, if you have a business that's earning 20 or 25% on equity, and it does that for a long time, time is your friend. But time is your enemy if you have your money in a low return business. And you may be lucky enough to pick the exact moment when it gets taken over by someone else. But we like to think when we buy a stock we're going to own it for a very long time, and therefore we have to stay away from businesses that have low returns on equity. Charlie?
Yeah, it's not that much fun to buy a business where you really hope this sucker liquidates before it goes broke.
We've been in a few of those too.
Right.
Yeah, Charlie and I, or at least I've owned stock in an anthracite, don't know what anthracite is, street railway companies, windmill manufacturers. What other gems have we had, Charlie?
Textiles.
Yeah, textiles. Yeah, textiles. Don't even think. Yeah, Berkshire was a mistake, believe it or not. I mean, we went into Berkshire because it was cheap statistically, just as a general investment back in the early 60s. And it was a company that in the previous 10 years had earned less than nothing. I mean, it had a significant net loss over the previous 10 years. It was selling well below working capital, so it was a cigar butt. And it was, I mean, we could have done the things we've done subsequently from a neutral base rather than a negative base, and actually it would have worked out better. But it's been a lot of fun. Number 4.
Good morning. My name is Jad Corey. I'm from Gaithersburg, Maryland. I just want to thank you for sharing your wisdom. And my question is, what criteria do you use to sell stock? I kind of understand how you buy it, but I'm not sure how you sell.
Yeah. Well, the best thing to do is buy a stock that you don't ever want to sell. I mean, and that's what we're trying to do. And that's true when we buy an entire business. I mean, we've bought all of Geico, or we bought all of See's Candy, or the Buffalo News. We're not buying those to resell. I mean, what we're trying to do is buy a business that we will be happy with if we own it the rest of our lives, and we expect to with those. It's the same principle applies to marketable securities. You get extra options with marketable securities. You can add to holdings, obviously easier. We can never own more than 100% of a business, but if we own 2% of a business and we like it at a given price, we can add and have 4 or 5%. So that's an advantage. Sometimes if we need money to move to another sector, like we did last year, we will trim from some holdings, but that doesn't mean we're negative on those businesses at all. I mean, we think they're wonderful businesses, or we wouldn't own them. And we would sell, if we needed money for other things. The Geico stock that I bought in 1951, I sold in 1952. It was, went on to be worth 100 or more times, before the 1976 problems, 100 or more times what I'd paid. But I didn't have the money to do something else. So you sell if you need money for something else. You may sell if you believe that valuations between different kinds of markets are somewhat out of whack. And we have done a little trimming last year in that matter. But that could well be a mistake. I mean, the real thing to do with a great business is just hang on for dear life. Charlie?
Yes, but the sales that do happen, the ideal way is when you found something you like immensely better. Isn't that obvious? That's the ideal way to sell.
And incidentally, the ideal purchase is to have something that you already like be selling at a price where you feel like buying more of it. I mean, we probably should have done more of that in the past in some situations. But that's the beauty of marketable securities. You really do. If you're in a wonderful business, you do get a chance periodically maybe to double up in it or something of the sort. If the stock market were to sell a lot cheaper than it is now, we would probably be buying more of the businesses that we already own. They would certainly be the first ones that we would think about. They're the businesses we like the best. Charlie?
Nothing more.
Okay, Zone 7.
My name is Patty Buffett, and I'm from Albuquerque, New Mexico.
I like your name.
Thanks. In your opinion, what effect will the year 2000 compliant issue have on the U.S. stock market and the global economy?
Well, I get different reports on 2000, but the main report I hear, I think, you wouldn't want to rely on me on this, but you could rely on our managers, and I think we're in good shape. It's costing us some money, but not huge amounts of money to be prepared for 2000. With companies in which I'm a director, I hear some reasonably good-sized numbers. Those numbers are in their annual reports and described as to the cost of compliance. But what I'm told by people, know a lot more than I do, is that they think probably that the weakest link may be in government. Think that in terms of where they stand versus the commercial sector, in terms of reaching where they need to be by 2000, that there's some areas of both national and state and local governments and foreign government where they're really behind the curve. Now, that is not an independent judgment of mine, but somebody said you want to be very careful about making a phone call at 5 seconds before midnight at the Millennium, because you may get charged for 100 years, you know. So it'll be interesting. I don't think it's going to affect Berkshire in any material way, and I certainly have a feeling that the world will get past it very easily. But it is expensive for some companies, and it's going to be very expensive for governments. Charlie?
Yeah, I find it interesting that it is such a problem. You know, it was predictable that the year 2000 would come.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, we decided that back in 1985, actually. We didn't welcome it, understand. That's not Berkshire's style, though. It is fascinating, isn't it, when you think about it, that a whole bunch of people with 160 IQs that could build up such a problem. But here we are, and that's why we stick with simple things. Number 10. Are we there?
Yes. Good morning, Mr. Buffett and Mr. Munger. My name is Patrick Brown from Charlotte, North Carolina. And I've watched returns on equity for the banking sector in the U.S. go up a good bit over the last few years. And the returns on tangible equity for some of the major banks that have led the consolidation have gone up a good bit more. Leads me to wonder whether these returns are sustainable over either the near term or the longer term, 5-10 years out.
Well, that's the $64 question, because the returns on equity, and particularly tangible equity, as the gentleman mentioned, and particularly tangible equity in the banking sector even, those returns have hit numbers that are unprecedented. And then the question is, if they're unprecedented, are they unsustainable? Charlie and I would probably think that we would certainly prefer, we would not base our actions on the premise that they are sustainable. 20% plus returns on tangible equity, or on book equity, and much higher returns on tangible equity. In the banking field, you have a number of enterprises that on tangible equity are getting up close to the 30% range. Now, can a system where the GDP in real terms is growing maybe 3%, where in nominal terms it grows 4 to 5%, can businesses consistently earn 20% on equity? They certainly can't if they retain most of their earnings, because you would have corporate profits rising as a percentage of GDP to the point that would get ludicrous. So under those conditions, you'd either have to have huge payouts, either by repurchases of shares or by dividends or by takeovers, actually, that would keep the level of capital reasonably consistent among industry, or because you couldn't sustain, let's just say every company retained all of its earnings and they earned 20% on equity. You could not have corporate profits growing at 20% as a part of the economy year after year. This has been a better world than we foresaw in terms of returns, and so we've been wrong before, and we're not making a prediction now, but we would not want to buy things on the basis that these returns would be sustained. We told you last year, if these returns are sustained and interest rates stayed at these levels or fell lower, that stock prices are in aggregate are justified, and we still believe that. But those are two big ifs, and the particularly big if, in my view, is the one about returns on equity and on tangible assets. It certainly goes against classic economic theory to believe that they can be sustained. Charlie, how do you feel about it?
Well, I think a lot of the increase in return on equity has been caused by the increasing popularity of Jack Welch's idea that you can't be a leader in a line of business, get out of it. And as you get fewer people in the business, why returns on equity can go up. Then it's gotten way more popular to buy in shares, even at very high prices per share. And if you keep the equity low enough by buying shares back, why, you can make return on equity whatever you want. We've had, to some extent, a slow revolution in corporate attitudes. And but Warren is right. You can't have massive accumulations of earnings that are retained and keep earning these rates of return on them.
An interesting question is to think about it. If you had 500 Jack Welches and they were running the Fortune cloned and they were running all of the Fortune 500 companies, would returns on equity for American business be higher or lower than they are presently? I mean, if you have 500 sensational competitors, they can all be rational, but that doesn't, and they will be, and they'll be smart, and they'll keep trying to do all the right things. But there's a self-neutralizing effect. It's like having 500 expert chess players or 500 expert bridge players. You still have a lot of losers if they get together and play in a tournament. So it's not at all clear that if all American management were dramatically better, leaving out the competition against foreign enterprises, that returns on equity would be a lot better. They might very well drive things down. That's what, to some extent, can easily happen in securities markets. It's way better to be in securities markets if you have 100 IQ and everybody else operating has an 80 than if you have 140 and all the rest of them also have 140. So it's the secret of life is weak competition. Somebody said, how do you beat Bobby Fischer, you know, and you play him any game except chess. Well, that's how you beat Jack Welch. You play him any game except business. Oh, he's a very good golfer, I want to point out. He shot a 69 a few months ago when I saw him at a very tough course. Jack manages to play 70 or 80 rounds of golf a year and come in subpar occasionally while still doing what he does at GE. He's a great manager. But 500 Jack Welches, I'm not at all sure would make stocks more valuable in this country. Zone 1.
I'm Ben Knoll, and I'm from Minneapolis. And first, I just wanted to thank you for providing your past annual letters to the shareholders, and Mr. Munger for providing your speech to the graduate students at the USC a couple years ago. Drawn a lot of insights from that, not only in investing, but also in my day job as a business manager. And I'm wondering if you could help me with my summer reading list and provide some additional suggestions for reading in the fields of investing and management, other than the standards of Graham and Fisher and so forth.
Charlie?
Yeah. I have recently read a new book twice, which I very seldom do. And that book is Guns, Germs, and Steel by Jared Diamond. And it's a marvelous book. And the way the guy's mind works would be useful in business. He's got a mind that is always asking why. And he's very good at coming up with answers. I would say it's the best work of its kind I have ever read.
I read a little easier book recently. I'm not even sure of the title. I don't pay much attention to titles when I get into the books, but it's something to the effect of the quotable Einstein. I mean, it's a lot of his commentary over the years, and it's great reading. The Fermat Theorem was the book. That isn't the exact title either, but it's the story of the discovery of the answer on that. That's a very interesting book. One of our shareholders from Sweden gave me a copy of that when I was in New York, and I've enjoyed it. Zone 2.
Jane Bell, Des Moines. Since I became a Berkshire Hathaway shareholder, I've been coming to these meetings. This is my second.
I've been coming to these meetings ever since I've been a shareholder.
Mr. Buffett, I'm a partner and owner in a consulting business, and we tell our clients and potential clients that we design solutions for what keeps them awake at night. Mr. Buffett, from your perspective as an investor, what keeps you awake at night?
Well, that's a good question, and that's one I always ask the managements of our subsidiaries as well as any new investment. I want to know what their nightmare is. Andy Grove, in his book Only the Paranoid Survive, talks about the silver bullet for a competitor. So in terms of if you only had one silver bullet, which competitor would you fire it at? And it's not a bad question, and your question's a little broader. If you only had one worry that you could get rid of, what would it be? I would say that and I think I speak for Charlie, I'll let him do it, but we really don't worry. We will do the best we can, and when we have capital allocated, sometimes it's very easy to do, sometimes it's almost impossible to do, but we're not going to worry about it because the world changes, and if we had something we were worried about in the business, we would correct it. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not really worried about we can lose $1 billion on a California earthquake, but I'm not worried about it. Although I have a sister who's in the audience that lives in California. I've told her to call me quickly if the dogs start running in circles or anything like that. But there's if you're worried about something, the thing to do is get it corrected and get back to sleep. And I can't think of anything I'm worried about at Berkshire. That doesn't mean that I have any good ideas as to what we should be doing with a whole lot of money that we have around. But I can't do anything about that except keep looking for things that I might understand and do something with the money. And if they aren't there, they aren't there, and we'll see what happens tomorrow and next week and next month and next year. Charlie, what are you worried about?
Well, in the 30-some years I've been watching you, I would say what it takes to make you not sleep at night is an illness in the family. Short of that, Warren likes the game. I like the game. And even in the periods that look tough to other people, it's a lot of fun.
It's a lot of fun.
It's a lot of fun.
In fact, it probably is the most it is the most. I mean, we define tough times differently than other people would, but our idea of tough times is like now, and our idea of we don't feel it's tough times when the market's going down a lot or anything of the sort. So we are having a good time then. I mean, we don't want to sound like undertakers during a plague or anything, but there's really, it makes no difference to us whether the price of Berkshire is going up or down. We're trying to figure out ways to make the company worth more money years down the road, and if we figure that out, the stock will take care of itself. So, and usually when the stock is going down, it means other things are going down, and that it's a better chance for us to deploy capital, and that's our business. So you will not see us worrying. Maybe we should. What may worry? No, Zone 4.
My name is Phil Yoon from LA, California. Mr. Warren Buffett, Mr. Trotter, I'm one of the persons who highly admire you both. I have two questions. Question one, your view on world financial business environment in the next decade. Question two, U.S. position for economic competition in the next decade. Thank you.
Well, you've asked two big questions, but you're going to get very small answers, I'm afraid. And that's no disrespect, but we don't think about those things very much. We just are looking for decent businesses, and incidentally, our views in the past wouldn't have been any good on those subjects. And we try to think about two things. We try to think about things that are important and things that are knowable. Now, there are things that are important that are not knowable. In our view, those two questions that you raised fall in that. There are things that are knowable but not important. We don't want to clutter our minds up with those. So we say, what is important and what is knowable? And what among the things that fall within those two categories can we translate into some kind of an action that is useful for Berkshire? And And there are all kinds of important subjects that Charlie and I, we don't know anything about. And therefore we don't think about them. So we have our view about what the world will look like over the next 10 years in business or competitive situations. We're just no good. We do think we know something about what Coca-Cola is going to look like in 10 years, or what Gillette's going to look like in 10 years, or what Disney's going to look like in 10 years, or what some of our operating subsidiaries are going to look like in 10 years. We care a lot about that. We think a lot about that. We want to be right about that. If we're right about that, the other things get to be, they're less important. And if we started focusing on those, we would miss a lot of big things. I've used this example before, but Coca-Cola went public in, I think it was 1919. And the first year, one share cost $40. The first year it went down a little over 50%. At the end of the year it was down to $19. There were some problems with bottler contracts, there was problems with sugar, various kinds of problems. If you'd had perfect foresight, you would have seen the world's greatest depression staring you in the face when the social order even got questioned. You would have seen World War II, you would have seen atomic bombs and hydrogen bombs. You would have seen all kinds of things. And you could always find a reason to postpone why you should buy that share of Coca-Cola. But the important thing wasn't to see that. The important thing was to see that they were going to be selling 1 billion 8-ounce servings of beverages a day this year, or some large number. And that the person who could make people happy 1 billion times a day around the globe ought to make a few bucks off doing it. And so that $40, which went down to $19, I think with dividends reinvested has to be well over $5 million now. And if you developed a view on these other subjects that in any way forestalled you acting on this more important, specific, narrow view about the future of the company, you would have missed a great ride. So that's the kind of thing we focus on. Charlie?
Yeah, we're not predicting the currents that will come, just how some things will swim in the currents, whatever they are.
Yes, Bill Ackman from New York. Is there a price at which it's inappropriate for a company to use its capital to buy back its stock?
Give me that again.
For example, Coca-Cola at 40 PE. Is that a smart place for Coke to deploy capital?
Well, it sounds like a very high price when you name it in terms of a PE to buy back the stock at that sort of number. But I would say this. Coca-Cola's been around 12 years now, and there are very few times in that 112 years, if any, when it would not have been smart for Coca-Cola to be repurchasing its shares. Coca-Cola is probably, in my view, among businesses that I can understand, it's the best large business in the world. I mean, it is a fantastic business, and we love it when Coke repurchases shares and our interest goes up. We owned 6.3% of Coca-Cola in 1988 when we bought in. We actually increased that a little bit a few years later. But if they had not repurchased shares, we probably would own about 6.7% or 6.8% of Coke now. As it is, we own a little over 8% through repurchases. There are going to be about 1 billion 8-ounce servings of Coke sold around the world, or Coca-Cola products sold around the world today. 8% of that is 80 million, and 6.8% is 68 million. So there are 12 million extra servings for the account of Berkshire Hathaway being sold around the world. And they're making a little over a penny a serving, so, you know, that gets me kind of excited. And I think all I can tell you is I approve of Coke repurchasing shares. I'd a lot rather have them repurchasing shares at 15 times earnings, but when I look at other ways to use capital, I still think it's a very good use of capital. And maybe the day will come when they can buy it at 20 times earnings, and if they can, I hope they go out and borrow a lot of money to buy a ton of it at those prices. And I think we will be better off 20 years from now if Coke follows a consistent repurchase approach. I do not think that is true for many companies. I mean, I think that repurchases have become in vogue and done for a lot of silly reasons. And so I don't think everybody's repurchase of shares is well reasoned at all. We see companies that issue options by the ton and then they repurchase shares much higher. I started reading about investments when I was 6, and I think the first thing that I read was, buy low, sell high. But these companies, through their options, they sell low and then they buy high, and they've got a different formula than I was taught. So there are a number that we don't approve of. But when we own stock in a wonderful business, we like the idea of repurchases even at prices that may give you nosebleeds. It generally turns out to be a pretty good policy. Charlie?
Well, I think the answer is that in any company, the stock could get to a price so high it would be foolish for the corporation to repurchase its shares.
Sure.
And you can even get into gross abuse. Before the crash, the Insul utilities were madly buying their own shares as a way of promoting the stock higher. It was like a giant Ponzi scheme at the end. So there's all kinds of excess that's possible, but the really great companies that buy at high price earnings, where that can be wise.
Our interest in Geico went from 33% to 50% without us laying out a dime, because Geico was repurchasing its shares, and we benefited substantially, but we benefited a lot more, obviously, when prices were lower. I mean, our interest in the Washington Post company has gone from 9.5% to 17.5% over the years without us buying a single share. But the Post or Coke or any number of companies don't get the bargain in repurchasing now that they used to. We still think it's probably the best use of money in many cases. Zone 8.
Hi, my name is Mary Semler from Seattle, Washington. Japan is a major holder of U.S. treasuries. Given the troubled Japanese economy, do you foresee Japan cashing in their U.S. investments to bail themselves out? Why or why not?
Sorry, I didn't get all that.
I didn't get that either.
I was busy chewing here, but
Japan is a major holder of U.S. treasuries. Given the troubled Japanese economy, do you foresee Japan cashing in their U.S. investments to bail themselves out? Why or why not?
The problems with the Japanese economy, and does that mean that are you thinking particularly about them dumping treasuries or something of the sort?
That's exactly what she's...
Yeah. Well, it's very interesting. All the questions about what so-called foreigners do with investments. Let's just assume the Japanese or any other country decides to sell some U.S. government holdings that they have. If they sell them to U.S. corporations or citizens or anything, what do they receive in exchange? They receive U.S. dollars. What do they do with the U.S. dollars? They can't get out of the system. If they sell them to the French, the French give them something in return. Now the French own the government securities. But really, as long as we, the United States, run a deficit, a big deficit, a trade deficit, we are accepting goods and giving something in exchange to foreigners. I mean, when they send us whatever that it may be, and on balance they send us more of that than we send over there, we give them something in exchange. We may give them an IOU, we may give them a government bond, but we may give them an investment they make in the United States. But they have to be net investors in this country as long as we're net consumers of their goods. It's a tautology. So I don't even know quite how a foreign government dumps its government bonds without getting some other type of asset in exchange that may have an effect on a different market. The one question you always want to ask in economics is, and not a bad idea elsewhere too, but is, and then what? Because there's always a second side to a transaction. And just ask yourself, if you are a Japanese bank and you sell $1 billion worth of government bonds, U.S. government bonds, what do you receive in exchange? And what do you do with it? And if you follow that through, I don't think you'll be worried about foreign governments selling U.S. bonds. It is not a threat. Charlie?
If I owned Japan, I would want a large holding of U.S. Treasuries. You're on an island nation without much in the way of national resources. I think their policy is quite intelligent for Japan, and I'd be very surprised if they dumped all their treasuries.
If they're a net exporter to us, though, what choice do they have? I mean, think about it. If they send over more goods to us than we send to them, which has been the case, they have to get something in exchange. Now, for a while, they were taking movie studios in exchange. You know? They were taking New York real estate in exchange. I mean, they've got a choice of assets, but they don't have a choice as to whether, if they can send us more than they get from us, whether they get some investment asset in return. I mean, it's amazing to me how little discussion there is of that, the fact that there's two sides to an equation. But it makes for better headlines when read the other way. Zone 10.
I'm Dale Max from University Park, Illinois. And I've got a question for each of you, a short question for Charlie, and maybe a little longer for Warren. My question for Charlie is, in a business school sense, what is the cost of capital for Berkshire Hathaway? And my question for Warren is that I've been on the internet and I look at Yahoo and they give you recommendations for companies, and when I search for Berkshire Hathaway, it shows that nobody is recommending Berkshire Hathaway, despite the fact that there are maybe 1,000 people that are wearing signs here, I love Berkshire Hathaway, and of course I've got mine on too, but what seems to be the problem in lack of recommendations?
Well, we're not recommending Yahoo, incidentally, either, but I'll let puzzle people for thousands of years, and then
the way that is taught in most business schools now, I find incoherent, and so I'm the one that asks that question and gets the incoherent answers. I don't have a good answer to a question I consider kind of a stupid question. What is the cost of capital at Berkshire Hathaway, drowning in this torrent of cash? Which
you don't need a mathematical answer. The first question is when you have capital, is it better to keep it or return it to shareholders? It's better to return it to shareholders when you cannot create more than $1 of value with that capital. That's test number one. And if you pass that threshold that you think you can achieve more than $1 of value for every dollar retained, then you simply look around for the thing that you feel the surest about and that promises the greatest return, weighted for that certainty. So our cost of capital is, in effect, is measured by the ability to create more than $1 of value for every dollar retained. If we're keeping dollar bills that are worth more in your hands than in our hands, then we've exceeded the cost of capital as far as I'm concerned. And once we think we can do that, then the question is how do we do it to the best of our ability? And frankly, all of the stuff I see in business schools, and I've not found any way to improve on that formula. Now, the trouble that you may have is that many managements would be reluctant to distribute money to shareholders, even if they would rationalize that they would do better than they then actually do. But that may be a danger on it, but that won't be solved by them hiring a bunch of people to come up with some cost of capital that also justifies them keeping the money, because that's what they'll do otherwise. The question about recommending the stock, we've very seldom had stock recommendations over the years. As I think back to 1965, I can't think of a lot of brokerage reports that have recommended Berkshire. I'm not looking for any, reports at all. We are not looking to have Berkshire sell at the highest possible price, and we're not looking to try and attract people to Berkshire who are buying stocks because somebody else recommends them to them. We prefer people who figure out for themselves why they themselves want to buy Berkshire, because they're much more likely to stick around if they enter the restaurant because they decide it's the restaurant they want to eat at than if somebody has touted them on it. And that's our approach. So we do nothing to encourage, but I think even if we did, we probably wouldn't generate a lot of recommendations. It's not a great stock to get rich on if you're a broker.
Yeah, I think the reason. I think one of the main reasons why it's so little recommended in the institutional market is that it's perceived as hard to buy in quantity.
We prefer, we've got some good institutions as holders, including one that's run by a very good friend of ours, but frankly, it's more fun for us to have a bunch of individual shareholders. I mean, you see it translates, if there's money made, it translates into changes in people's lives and not some change in somebody's performance figure for one quarter. And we think that individuals are much more likely to join us with the idea of staying with us for as long as we stay around. And you know, that's the way we look at the business. Very few institutions look at investments that way, and frankly, we think they're often less rational holders than we get with individuals. Number one.
Hello, I'm Steve Davis from San Francisco. I'd like your advice on how to understand annual reports, what you look for, what's important, what's not important, and what you've learned over the years from reading thousands of reports. Thank you.
Well, we've read a lot of reports, I will tell you that. And we start by looking at the reports of companies that we think we can understand. So we hope to be reading reports, and I do read hundreds of them every year. We hope to be reading reports of businesses that are understandable to us. And then we see from that report whether the management is telling us about the things that we would want to know about if we owned 100% of the company. And when we find a management that does tell us about those things and that is candid in the same way that a manager of a subsidiary would be candid with us and talks in language that we can understand, it definitely improves our feeling about investing in such a business, it definitely improves our feeling about investing in such a business, and the reverse turns us off to some extent. So if we read a bunch of public relations gobbledygook, we want to understand the business better when we get through with the annual report than when we picked it up. And that is not difficult for a management to do if they want to do it. If they don't want to do it, you know, we think that is a factor in whether we want to be their partners over a 10-year period or so. But we've learned a lot from annual reports. For example, I would say that the Coca-Cola annual report over the last good many years been an enormously informative document. I mean, I can't think of any way if I had had a conversation with Roberto Goizueta or now Doug Ivester, and they were telling me about the business, they would not be telling me more than I get from reading that annual report. We bought that stock based on an annual report. We did not buy it based on any conversation of any kind with the top management of Coca-Cola before we bought our interest. We simply bought it based on reading the annual report, plus our knowledge of how the business worked. Charlie?
Yeah, I do think if you've got a standardized bunch of popular jargon that looks like it came out of the same consulting firm, I do think it's a big turnoff. That's not to say that some of the consulting mantras aren't right, but I think there's a lot for sort of candid, simple, coherent prose. A lot to be said for it.
Almost every business has problems, and we just assume the manager would tell us about them. We would like that in the businesses we run. In fact, one of the things, we give very little advice to our managers, but one thing we always do say is to tell us the bad news immediately, and I don't see why that isn't good advice for the manager of a public company. Over time, you know, I'm positive it's the best. I'm positive it's the best policy, but a lot of companies, they're dying just to pump out what they think is good news all the time, and they have this attitude that, you know, that you've got a bunch of animals out there to be fed and that they're going to feed them what they want to eat all the time, and over time the animals learn. So we try to stay away from businesses like that.
What you seldom see in an annual report is a sentence like this: "This is a very serious problem, and we haven't quite figured out yet how to handle it." But believe me, that is an accurate statement much of the time. All right, zone 3.
Hello, Mr. Buffett and Mr. Munger. My name is James Claus from New York City, and I just wanted to ask you a question. Both you and Mr. Munger have repeatedly said that you don't believe that business valuation is being taught correctly at our universities. And as a PhD student at Columbia Business School, that troubles me understandably, because in a couple of years I'll be joining the ranks of those teaching business valuation. My question isn't what sources such as Graham or Fisher or Mr. Munger's talks you would point people that are teaching business valuation to, but do you have any counsel about the techniques of teaching business valuation?
Well, I was lucky. I had a sensational teacher in Ben Graham, and we had a course there. There's at least one fellow out in the audience here that attended with me, and just Ben made it terribly interesting, because what we did was we walked into that class and we valued companies, and he had various little games he would play with us. Sometimes he would have us evaluate company A and company B with a whole bunch of figures, and then we would find out that A and B were the same company at different points in its history, for example. And there were a lot of little games he played to get us to think about what were the key variables, and how could we go off the track. I remember one time Ben met with Charlie and me and about 9 or so other people down in San Diego in 1968 or so, and he gave all of us a little true-false test, and we all thought we were pretty smart, and we all flunked. But that was his way of teaching us that a smart man playing his own game and working at fooling you could do a pretty good job at it. But I would, if I were teaching a course on investments, there would be simply one valuation study after another with the students trying to identify the key variables in that particular business and evaluating how predictable they were first, because that is the first step. If something is not very predictable, forget it. You don't have to be right about every company. You have to make a few good decisions in your lifetime. But then when you find, the important thing is to know when you find one where you really do know the key variables, which ones are important, and you do think you've got a fix on them. Where we've done well, Charlie and I made a dozen or so very big decisions relative to net worth, but not as big as they should have been. And we've known we were right on those going in. I mean, they just weren't that complicated, and we knew we were focusing on the right variables and that they were dominant. And we knew that even though we couldn't take it out to 5 decimal places or anything like that, we knew that in a general way we were right about them. And that's what we look for, the fat pitch. And that's what I would be trying to teach students to do. And I would not try to teach them to think they could do the impossible. Charlie?
Yes, if you're planning to teach business valuation, and what you hope to do is teach the way people teach real estate appraising. So you can take any company, and your students, after studying your course, will be able to give you an appraisal of that company, which will indicate really its future prospects compared to its market price. I think you're attempting the impossible.
Yeah, probably on the final exam, I would take an internet company, and I would say the final exam, the question is, how much is this worth? And anybody that gave me an answer, I would flunk.
Right.
Make grading papers easy, too. Okay, zone 6.
My name is Bob Swanson from Phoenix, and I'm wondering, what are the advantages of investing in Berkshire Hathaway as opposed to investing in the stocks that Berkshire owns?
Well, a lot of people do one or the other, and some people do both, but you have to really make up your own mind on that. We're not going to go to great lengths to tell you about everything that Berkshire is doing as we go along, and there could be some changes, and there will be things that can happen in Berkshire that I think you would have trouble duplicating elsewhere. But on the other hand, if you'd put all your money in Coca-Cola some years back, you might have done better than if you put in Berkshire. So we really make no recommendation to what people do with their money. We do not seek to become investment advisors through, in effect, our portfolio actions at Berkshire. Charlie?
Yeah, basically, we hate it when people follow us around buying what we buy.
Nothing personal.
No. By the way, the questioner before this last one asked, what is the market value under the hammer of all Berkshire's operating subsidiaries? And the answer is, you have to figure that out yourself.
Mr. Nice Guy. But we give you the information, incidentally, where your judgment on that should be about as good as ours. There's nothing mysterious about valuing the Buffalo News or See's Candy or Flight Safety or Dairy Queen. So you really have the same information we have in that. I mean, if there's material information that we aren't giving you about any important Berkshire subsidiary, we'd like to give it to you because we think you are entitled to have the information that enables you to value the various pieces. Because of the aggregate size of Berkshire now in terms of market capitalization and some of the positions we own, the smaller subsidiaries really cannot have that much effect. We love them just as much. I enjoy all of the businesses we're in, and I enjoy the people that run them. So we don't we don't differentiate in our attitude within the company, but in terms of the actual impact on the valuation of Berkshire, there are a number that really they just don't make that much difference in terms of figuring out whether Berkshire's worth X or X minus 1,000 or plus 1,000, because 1,000 now is over $1 billion in terms of valuation. $1 billion is still a lot of money. Area 8, please.
I'm Tubby Stamen from Palm Beach, Florida. I know you enjoy bridge very much. I know you play my late husband's convention. Tell me, how often are you able to devote to this wonderful game? How many times a week do you play other than the internet?
I didn't get all of that, Charlie.
How much bridge are you playing?
Uh-oh.
Yes.
Well, we should put this in the annual report because it may be a material factor. I'm probably at least 10 hours a week, maybe a little more. I don't get any better by doing it either. It's rather discouraging, but it is a lot of fun, and it has to have come out of reading time. I don't think it's hurt Berkshire yet, but that may be because we're in a slow period generally. If the market goes down a lot, I promise to cut back on my bridge. Charlie?
Yeah. Well, I probably play 3 or 4 hours a week, but I don't play on the internet.
He plays a lot of golf, though. Confess, Charlie.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, we both spend about the same amount of time goofing off. I mean, if you want to know. Okay, Area 10.
Good morning, Mr. Munger and Mr. Buffett. My name is Prakash Puram from Minneapolis. There seem to be great values in the technology sector that meet most of your criteria, philosophy in investing, with the exception of the simplicity criterion. Names like IBM, Microsoft, HP, Intel. Would you ever consider investing in companies in this sector in the future?
Well, the answer is no, and it's probably pretty unfortunate because I've been an admirer of Andy Grove and Bill Gates, and I wish I translated that admiration, and I don't know what that world will look like in 10 years. And I don't want to play in a game where I think the other guys have got an advantage over me. And I could spend all my time thinking about tech. I wouldn't be the 100th or the 1,000th or the 10,000th smartest guy in the country in looking at those businesses. So that is a 7 or 8 foot bar that I can't clear. There are people that can clear it, but I can't clear it, and no matter how I train, I can't clear it. So the fact that there will be a lot of money made by somebody doesn't bother me really. And I mean, there may be a lot of money made by somebody in cocoa beans, but I don't know anything about them. And there are a whole lot of areas I don't know anything about. So I think it would be a very valid criticism if Charlie and I, if it were possible that Charlie and I, and by spending a year working on it, could become well enough informed so that our judgment would be better than other people's. But that wouldn't happen, and it would be a waste of time. It's much better for us to swing at the easy pitches. Charlie?
Whatever you think you know about technology, I think I know less.
That's probably not true, incidentally. Charlie has a little more of a... He understands some things in the physical world a lot better than I do. But anyway, we'll go to zone one.
Fellow investors of Berkshire and Hathaway, Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger. I'm from originally China. Now I have a company in Michigan. I want to ask questions based on facts. I want to sell Coke, Geico, and a little book called The Wizard of Omaha, The Investment Philosophy of Warren Buffett in China. Through all the villages, the cities, little towns, I want to make that a reality. Cheers.
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 Zone three?
I'm not asking a question.
Oh, yeah, just warming up. Okay.
Yeah. I will.
They always tell me to get off the stage while you're in good shape, but I'll say it.
I could quit, but you missed your chance. I'm an owner of Berkshire, and I spend 6% of my net worth to be engaged to Berkshire.
Wise decision.
I did better than, guess who? Bill Gates. I noticed Bill Gates and you were traveling on a slow boat in China. I want to go home on a fast train. You want me to cut me off? If you want me to cut out, fine. Up to the investors. I quit if you want me to quit. I come a long ways. Okay. I know I'm a problem for you. But I'm here for a reason. Because I made some money. I'm going on a train. A smile train. Yesterday, or the day before at the baseball, I asked Mr. Warren Buffett, have you heard of the smile train? He said no. I'm back here to respond. This is a smile train.
Okay, we thank you, but I think that's your question. We better go to zone four on that thing.
Yes, hello to Mr. Munger and Mr. Buffett. My name is Jerry Gonzalez from Plantation. My question is, what are your recommendations of Berkshire Hathaway if Charlie Munger were in charge, or your third man in charge, your third man, which I think you said, it's the CEO of Geico. What are your recommendations? If Charlie Munger were to be in charge fully, 100%, or your third man, the CEO of Geico.
Well, in due course, this corporation will have a change in management. I'm afraid we have no way of fixing that. But we do not, apart from making sure we've got good options and having some system in place, we are not obsessing about a future management yet.
No, well, the director...
Warren plans to live almost indefinitely.
Absolutely. Although I must say, at my last birthday, somebody asked me how old I was. I said, well, why don't you just count the candles on the cake? And he said he was driven back by the heat. So, but we're not going to leave willingly. And the directors know who, and they have a letter that says who they think, who we think should be the ones to succeed us at both the operating aspect and the investment allocation aspect, and that those letters can change over time as we keep hanging around. But I don't worry about the fact that 99% plus of my estate will be in Berkshire Hathaway stock, or that a foundation will eventually receive that stock. So it doesn't bother me in the least. I can't think of a place I'd rather have it. And that includes my appraisal of the managers that we have who can step in and do what Charlie and I do, and who knows, one of them may even understand technology.
I think this place would have very respectable prospects if the top 25 managers all dropped dead at once.
Well, that's not an experiment we intend to pursue.
No, but I see no reason to think it wouldn't continue to do quite well.
Right.
It's been lovingly put together to have a certain margin of safety.
We actually, if we have a choice, it's number 3 through 23, though, that we're 25 that we're interested in. Okay, area 8, please.
Mr. Buffett and Mr. Munger, my name is Sanjeev Merchandani, shareholder from Boston. First of all, thank you to both of you for everything. I have 2 questions. For you, Mr. Buffett, you obviously have filters that you apply on selecting people as you do on stocks. Can you tell us a little bit about what those filters are?
Filters on people?
Yes, in selecting, you have an ability to motivate people who have a lot of money to keep working. What do you look for to figure out who those people are?
Well, that is a key question, because when we buy businesses, we don't have managers to put in them. I mean, we're not buying them that way. We don't have a lot of MBAs around the office that we're...
Thank God.
Yeah. That I have not promised that they're going to have all kinds of opportunities. So, as a practical matter, we need management with the businesses that we buy. And 3 times out of 4, or thereabouts, the manager is the owner and is receiving tens of millions, maybe hundreds of millions of dollars. So they don't have to work. And we have to decide in that time when we meet them whether they love the business or love money. And we're not making a moral judgment. Charlie may, but I'm not making a moral judgment about whether it's better to love the business or love money, but it's very important for me to know which of the two is the primary motivator with them. And we have had extremely good luck in identifying people who love their business. And so all we have to do is avoid anything that on our part that diminishes that love of the business or makes other conditions so intolerable that they overcome that love of the business. And we have a number of people working for us that have no financial need to work at all, and they probably outwork 95% or more of the people in the world, and they do it because they love smacking the ball. And we virtually had no mistakes in that respect. And we have identified a number of people, Charlie and I have, in terms of proposals to us, where we felt that they liked the money better than the business. They were kind of tired of the business, and they might promise us that they would continue on and they would do it in good faith, but something would happen 6 months later, a year later, and they'd say to themselves, why am I doing this, for Berkshire Hathaway when I could be doing whatever else they want to do? I can't tell you exactly what filter it is that we put them through mentally, but I can tell you that if you've been around a while, I think you can have a pretty high batting average in coming to those conclusions, as you can about other aspects of human behavior. I'm not saying you can take 100 people and take a look at them and analyze their personalities or anything of the sort, but I think when you see the extreme cases, the ones that are going to cause you nothing but trouble, or the ones that are going to bring you nothing but joy, I think you can identify those pretty well. Charlie?
Well, yeah, I think it's pretty simple. You've got integrity, intelligence, and experience, and dedication. And that's what human enterprises need to run well. And we've been very lucky in getting this marvelous group of associates to work with all these years. It would be hard to do better, I think, than we've done in that respect. Look around this place. I mean, and particularly you young people, look around this place. Look at how much gratification can come into these lives which have been mostly spent in deferring gratification. It's a very funny group of people, you shareholders.
Well, on that note of self-congratulation, let's go have lunch, and we'll be back in half an hour.
Hello. My name is Nelson Arata. I'm from Southern California, and I have a question. It's not really related to intrinsic value or any of that stock stuff, but more on houses. I'm still quite young. I don't have a house yet, and I'm thinking about buying a house someday soon. And in order to do that, I'm going to have to put a down payment, which means I might have to share or sell my shares. And I was wondering if you can provide some insight on when is the best time to buy a house and how much down payment you should be putting down in relation to interest rates and also in relation to available cash and the stock market.
Well, Charlie's going to give you an answer to that in a second. I'll just relate one story, which was when I got married, we did have about $10,000 starting off, and I told Susie, I said, now, you know, there's two choices. It's up to you. We can either buy a house, which will use up all my capital and clean me out, and it'll be like a carpenter who's had his tools taken away from him, or you can let me work on this, and someday, who knows, maybe I'll even buy a little bit larger house than would otherwise be the case. So she was very understanding on that point, and we waited until 1956. We got married in 1952, and I decided to buy a house when the down payment was about 10% or so of my net worth, because I really felt I wanted to use the capital for other purposes. But that was a way different environment in terms of what was available to buy. In effect, if you have the house you want to buy, I definitely believe in just going out and probably getting the job done. But in effect, you're probably making something in the area of a 7 or 8% investment implicitly when you do it. So, you'll have to figure out your own equation from that. Charlie probably has better advice on that. He's a big homeowner. In both senses of the word.
I think the time to buy a house is when you need one.
And when do you need one?
Well, I have very old-fashioned ideas on that, too. The single people, I don't care if they ever get a house.
When do you need one if you're married, Charlie? I'll follow up here for this. You need one when your wife wants one.
Yes. I think you've got that exactly right.
Yeah. Sure.
Gregory Crawford needs to go to the security office, please, for emergency message. Gregory Crawford to the security office for emergency message. Thank you.
Okay. Hope it isn't a margin call. Okay, we'll go to zone 1, please.
I'm Ralph Pfeffer from Phoenix, Arizona. The question I'm going to ask does not pertain to Berkshire Hathaway, but I would appreciate it if you gentlemen, if you can, explain the justification and rationalization for the exorbitant salaries, bonuses, perks, directors' fees, and other benefits that most public corporations are paying.
Well, I would say this. In my own view, the most exorbitant are not necessarily the biggest numbers. What really bothers me is when companies pay a lot of money for mediocrity, and that happens all too often. But we have no quarrel in our subsidiaries, for example, for paying a lot of money for outstanding performance. I mean, we get it back 10 or 20 or 50 for one. And similarly in public companies, we think that there have been managers and are managers who have taken companies to many, many, many billions of market value, more than would have happened with virtually anyone else. And they sometimes take a lot of money for that. Sometimes, as in the case of Tom Murphy at Cap Cities, you know, it just didn't make a difference to him. I mean, he performed in a way that would have justified huge sums, but it wasn't. I mean, he would tell you that he had all the money he needed, so, and he just didn't care to take what the market might bear. But I am bothered by irrational pay systems, and I'm particularly bothered when average managers take really large sums. I'm bothered when they design or have designed for them systems that are very costly to the company, maybe partly to make themselves look good because they want huge options themselves, so they feel like they give options widely throughout the company. So they design a system that is illogical company-wide because they want one that's illogical for them personally. But large sums per se don't bother me. I'm not saying, you know, whether any individual might want to take them or not. But I do not mind paying a lot of money for performance. It's done in athletics, it's done in entertainment, but in business, the people who are the 200 hitters and the people who would not attract a crowd as an entertainer have worked it out so that, I mean, the system has evolved in such a way that many of them take huge sums, and I think that's obscene, but I can tell you there isn't much you can do about it. The system feeds on itself, and companies do look at other companies' proxy statements. Every CEO does, and they say, well, if Joe Smith is worth X, I have to be worth more, and they tell the directors that certainly you wouldn't be hiring anybody that was below average, so how can you pay me below average? And the consultants come in and ratchet up the rewards, and it's not anything that's going to go away. It's like we were talking about campaign finance reform earlier. The people who have their hands on the switch are the beneficiaries of the system. Who have their hands on the switch are the beneficiaries of the system, benefiting enormously and perhaps disproportionately from that system. Charlie?
Well, yeah, I'd like to report that the original Vanderbilt behaved even better than the people at Berkshire Hathaway. He didn't take any salary at all. He thought it was beneath him as a significant shareholder to take a salary. That ideal, I'm afraid, died with him.
Yeah, Charlie and I, our directors are paid $900 a year, but I tell them on an hourly basis they're making a fortune because we don't work them that hard. But what Charlie and I did not think through when we established that $900 a year is that they set our salaries too. So we have not followed the standard procedure, which is to load it on the directors, and the directors shall load it on you.
I do think it will have pernicious effects for the country. It's escalating because I think you're getting at the very top, corporate salaries in America are too high. And that is not a good thing for a civilization when the leaders are regarded as not dealing fairly with the institutions. All I can say is that prostitution would be a step up for them.
Put him down as undecided. Zone 2, please.
Yes, sir. Good afternoon. My name is Matt Lovejoy from Lexington, Kentucky, and gladly I'm not a consultant. I have a question, sir, Mr. Buffett, about your operating management style. In my opinion, the mainstream media minimizes the significance of your non-public operating investments. When you consider capital allocation in these companies, do you have the managers submit annual business plans? And if so, do you formally meet with those managers to see how well you can track progress against those plans?
Yeah, that's a good question, and the answer is that we may meet with some of them annually, we may meet with others semi-annually, but we have no formal system whatsoever, and we will never have a formal system. We don't demand any meetings of any of our managers. We have no operating plan submitted to headquarters. Some of the companies use operating plans themselves, some of them don't. They are all run by people who have terrific records, and they have different batting styles. And we're not about to tinker with somebody that's batting with 375 just because somebody else holds the bat a little differently or uses a different weight bat or something of the sort. So we believe in letting them do currently and in the future what has been successful for them in the past. And different people have very different styles. I've got my own style, but we have managers that like to talk things over. We have other managers that like to go their own way. And we have managers that have a by-the-book approach, which works well. We have other managers that wouldn't dream of that. We have managers that, most managers probably have monthly statements of financials. We have other managers that don't. And that really isn't a problem. What we want to have is good managers. And there's more than one way to get to at least business heaven. And we have a number that have found different ways to get there. So we have never imposed, we have certain requirements because we're a public company and SEC requirements and Internal Revenue Service coordination, but we have never imposed anything from the top on any of the operating managements. We have MBAs running companies, we have people that never saw a business school, and talent is the scarce commodity, and when you find talent and they've got their own way of doing things, we're delighted to have them do it. More than letting them have them do it, we want them to do it their way. We don't want to change them. Charlie?
Yeah, the truth of the matter is that we have decentralized power in the operating businesses to a point just short of total abdication. And we don't think our system is right for everybody. It has suited us and the kind of people that have joined us. But we don't have criticism for other people like Emerson Electric or something who have operating plans and compare performance quarterly against plan and all that sort of thing. It's just not our style.
Yeah, we centralize money, and everything else we decentralize pretty much. But I don't know whether you've met him here, but for example, Al Yoshi is here. He started flight safety in 1951, and I don't know what he'll spend on simulators this year, but it could easily be $100 million or thereabouts. And if I spent hours with him, I couldn't add 1/100th of 1% to his knowledge of how to allocate that money. I mean, it would be ridiculous. It'd be a waste of his time, and it would be an act of arrogance on my part. And I have no worries about how Al allocates the money. And that's an unusually capital-intensive business compared to most of our businesses. There's some that I get into the details more because I've just worked with a person that's running things a long time, and we kind of enjoy it. Ajit and I talk virtually every night about the reinsurance business. I am not improving the quality of his decisions at all, but it's an interesting game, and I like hearing about it, and he doesn't mind talking about it, so we talk them over. But that's just a matter of personal chemistry. And as we add managers, we will adapt to them. We adapt our accounting systems to a degree to them. Now we do have certain requirements that result from the SEC and IRS, but we don't. Our managers know their businesses, and they know how to run them. And if they don't, this hasn't been the case, but if they didn't, we would, we'd do something about the manager. We wouldn't try and build a bunch of systems. Zone 6, please.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. My name is George Donner from Fort Wayne, Indiana. My question has to do with estimating the intrinsic value of a company, in particular the capital-intensive companies like you were mentioning. I'm thinking of things like McDonald's and Walgreens, but there are lots of others where you have a very healthy and growing operating cash flow, but it's largely or completely offset by heavy expenditures on putting up new stores or restaurants or building a new plant. And so my question is, what do you do for your estimate of future free cash flow? And with treasuries around, long treasuries around 6%, at what rate do you discount those cash flows?
Well, we discount at the long rate just to have a standard of measurement across all businesses. But we would take the company that is spending the money as it comes in, and they don't get credit for gross cash flow. They get credit for whatever net cash is left every year. But of course, if they're spending the money wisely, even though you have to discount it for more years, the growth in cash development should offset that, or they weren't investing it wisely. The best business is one that gives you more and more money every year without putting up anything to get it, or very little. And we've got some businesses like that. The second best business is a business that also gives you more and more money. It takes more money, but the rate at which you reinvest the money to get that growth is a very satisfactory rate. The worst business of all is the one that grows a lot, and where you're forced in effect to grow to stay in the game at all, and where you're reinvesting the capital at a very low rate of return. Sometimes people are in those businesses without knowing about it. But in terms of discounting, in terms of calculating intrinsic value, you look at the cash that is expected to be generated, and you discount back. In our case, we use the long-term treasury rate. That doesn't mean that you pay the amount that present value calculation leads to, but it means that you use that as a common yardstick, that treasury rate. And that means if somebody is reinvesting all their cash flow the next 5 years, they better have some very big figures coming in down the road, because at some day a financial asset has to give you back cash to justify you laying out cash for it now. Investing is the art, essentially, of laying out cash now to get a whole lot more cash later on, and something at some point better deliver cash. Ben Graham in his class we used to talk about what he called the Frozen Corporation. And the Frozen Corporation was a company whose charter prohibited it from ever paying anything to its owners, or ever being liquidated, or ever being sold. And
sort of like a Hollywood producer.
Yeah. And the question was, what was such an enterprise worth? Well, that's sort of a theoretical question, but it forced you to think about the realities of what business is all about. And business is all about putting out money today to get back more money later on. Charlie?
I do think there is an interesting problem that you raise, because I think there is a class of businesses where the eventual cash back part of the equation tends to be an illusion. I think there are businesses where you just keep pouring it in, and then all of a sudden it doesn't work and no cash comes back. And what makes our life interesting is trying to avoid those and get on the alternative kind that drowns you in cash.
The one figure we regard as utter nonsense is the so-called EBITDA. I mean, the idea of looking at a figure before the cash requirements of merely staying in the same place, and there usually are. Any business with significant fixed assets almost always has with it a concomitant requirement that major cash be reinvested in order simply to stay in the same place competitively and in terms of unit sales. To look at some figure that is before that is stated before those cash requirements is absolute folly, and it's been misused by lots of people to sell lots of merchandise in recent years.
It's not to the credit of the investment banking fraternity that it has learned to speak in terms of EBITDA. I mean, the idea of using a measure that you know is nonsense and then piling additional reasoning on that false assumption. It's not creditable intellectual performance. And then once everybody is talking in terms of nonsense, why, it gets to be standard.
Zone 7, please.
Hi, my name is Brandon Vecchio, and I'm in the Academy of Finance at Northwest High School here in Omaha. Could you explain the criteria you look at when selecting your stocks?
Well, we look at, and I'm glad you came. I hope there's a large group. I got a note, I think, from your teacher on that. We look at it, the criteria for selecting a stock is really the criteria for looking at a business. We are looking for a business we can understand. That means they sell a product that we think we understand, and we understand the nature of their competition, what could go wrong with it over time. And then when we find that business, we try to figure out whether the economics of it means the earning power over the next 5 or 10 or 15 years is likely to be good and getting better or poor and getting worse. But we try to evaluate that future stream. And then we try to decide whether we're getting in with some people that we feel comfortable being in with. And then we try to decide what's an appropriate price for what we've seen up to that point. And as I said last year, what we do is simple but not necessarily easy. The checklist that is going through our mind is not very complicated. Knowing what you don't know is important, and sometimes that's not easy. And knowing the future is definitely it's impossible in many cases in our view, and it's difficult in others, and sometimes it's relatively easy, and we're looking for the ones that are relatively easy. And then when you get all through, you have to find it at a price that's interesting to you, and that's very difficult for us now, although there have been periods in the past where it's been a total cinch. And that's what goes through our mind. If you were thinking of buying a service station or a dry cleaning establishment or a convenience store in Omaha to invest your life savings in and run as a business, you'd think about the same sort of things. You think about the competitive position and what it would look like 5 or 10 years from now, and how you were going to run it, who was going to run it for you, and how much you had to pay. And that's exactly what we think of as when we look at a stock, because a stock is nothing other than a piece of a business. Charlie?
Yeah, if finance were, when finance is properly taught, it should be taught from cases where the investment decision is easy. And the one I always cite is the early history of National Cash Register Company, and that was created by a fanatic who bought all the patents and had the best sales force and the best production plants, and he was a force in the best production plants, and he was a very intelligent, was a godsend to retailing when cash registers were invented. So that was the pharmaceuticals of a former age. If you read an early annual report prepared by Patterson, who was CEO of National Cash Register, an idiot could see that this was a talented fanatic, very favorably located, and that therefore the investment decision was easy. If I were teaching finance, I would collect 100 cases like that, and that's the way I would teach the students.
We have that annual report. What was that, 1904 or something, Charlie? But it's really a classic report, because Patterson not only tells you why his cash register is worth about 20 times what he's selling for to people, but he also tells you that you're an idiot if you want. But he also tells you that you're an idiot if you want to go in competition with him. It's a classic.
It is just a total report, and not realize that this guy can't lose.
My name is Sheena Sho from the Academy of Finance. What recommendations would you give us as teenagers to prepare for our future and become as successful as you?
Well, if you're interested in business, I definitely think you ought to learn all the accounting you can by the time you're in your early 20s. accounting is the language of business. Now, that doesn't mean it's a perfect language, so you have to know the limitations of that language as well as all aspects of it. So I would advise you to learn accounting, and I would advise you to be, in terms of part-time employment or anything else, work at a number of businesses. There's nothing like seeing how business operates to build your judgment in the future about businesses. When you understand what kind of things are very competitive and what kind of things are less competitive and why that works that way, all of that adds to your knowledge. So I would do a lot of reading. If you're interested in investments, I would take the accounting courses. I do a lot of reading about investments, and I would get as much business experience. I would talk business with people that are in business to find out what they think makes their operation tick or where they have problems and why. I just think you just kind of sop it up every place that you can, and if it turns you on, you'll do well in it. I mean, I think that if it there certain activities grab different people, but if business is of interest to you, my guess is you'll do well. And if you understand business, you understand investments. Investments are simply business decisions that in terms of capital.
Yeah, there's also the little matter of underspending.
Mastered.
Yes. That really works if you keep at it.
Yeah, I mean, Charlie and I both. Charlie started having children at a rapid rate, so he was a lawyer when there was not big money, and then, but I was any money you save before you get out and start having a family is probably worth any dollar is probably worth $10 later on, simply because you can save it. It's the time to save is young, and you'll never have a better time to save than really pre-formation of a family, because the expenditures come along then, whether you like them or not. So work for yourself first and put the money aside. I was lucky that way. I didn't have to pay for my own college. Probably wouldn't have gone to college if I'd had to pay for it. But I was able to save everything I made in my teens, and those dollars got magnified quite a bit. Whereas the money when I started first selling securities, I mean the money I made then was taken up by family needs to quite an extent. So start saving early. A lot of it's habit anyway, so it's a great habit to have. Okay, zone one, please.
My name is Jim Howard. I'm from Syracuse, Indiana. My question is, does the book Buffettology by Mary Buffett present fairly in all material respects the calculations you used in evaluating the business for purchase, or did the lady just write a book?
Well, it was written by two authors, but I would say that no, I would say that in a general way it gets at the investment philosophy, but I wouldn't say that it's not the book I would have written precisely, but I have no quarrel with it either. I actually think by reading Berkshire's reports, you should be able to get more. I would think you get more of our philosophy than in any other manner. I think Larry Cunningham, the fellow who held the symposium at the Cardozo School at Yeshiva, did the best job actually of sort of reconstructing the various things that have been written at Berkshire into sort of the best organized presentation of our philosophy. So
he's selling it right here. It's a very practical.
Yeah, he had it at Borsheim, in the mall outside Borsheim yesterday, and Larry did a very good job, and I had nothing to do with it, but I think I really think he's done a first-class job of sort of organizing by topic. I mean, all these things that I've sort of written annually, and Charlie's written over time. So that would probably be my, if I were picking one thing to read, that would probably be the one.
My question. You owned Disney once before and sold it. you also owned advertising companies in the 70s, I believe.
Right.
And you sold them. Could we have some insight into your thinking as to why you sold them?
I'm not sure I want to give you any insight into that thinking. Well, we'll start off with the fact that when I was 11, I bought some city service preferred at 38, and it went to 200, but I sold at 40. So, grabbing my $2 a share of profit. So everything we've ever sold has gone up subsequently, but some of them have gone up more painfully subsequently than others. And certainly the Disney sale in the 60s was a huge mistake. I should have been buying. I did forget about holding. And that's happened many times. I mean, we think that anything we sell should go up subsequently because we own good businesses, and we may sell them because we need money for something else, but we still think they're good businesses, and we think good businesses are going to be worth more over time. So, but I must say that selling to Disney was a mistake, and actually the ad agencies have done very well since we sold them too. Now maybe some of that money went into Coca-Cola or something else, so I don't worry about that. I would worry, frankly, if I sold a bunch of things right at the top, because that would indicate that in effect I was practicing the bigger fool type approach to investing, and I don't think that can be practiced successfully over time. I think the most successful investors, if they sell at all, will be selling things that end up going a lot higher because it means that they've been buying into good businesses as they've gone along. Charlie?
Well, I'm glad that the questioner brought this touch of humility because it is really useful to be reminded of your errors. I mean, and I think we're pretty good at that. I mean, we kind of mentally rub our own noses in our own mistakes. And that is a very good mental habit. Warren can tell you the exact number of cents per share that he sold at and compare it with the current price. It actually hurts him.
It actually doesn't hurt. The truth is, because you just keep on doing things. But it is instructive to do postmortems on everything, and say, as long as you don't get carried away with it. But every acquisition decision, that kind of thing, there should be postmortems done. Most companies don't like to do postmortems on their capital expenditures. I've been a director of a lot of companies over the years, and they've usually not spent a lot of time on the postmortems. They spend a lot of time on telling you how wonderful the acquisitions are going to be or the capital expenditures, but they don't like to look so hard necessarily at the results.
Think of how refreshing the board of directors meeting would be if they sat down and now we'll spend 3 hours examining all our stupid blunders and how much we've blown.
And then after that, the compensation committee will meet. No, that is not going to happen.
Right.
Okay, Area 5, please.
Hello, I'm Jamie McMahon from Birmingham, Alabama, and I was hoping that Mr. Buffett and Mr. Munger, y'all would expand a little bit on your ideas of an inheritance and the positive and negative influences that can have on your heirs, and what you might be able to do as a business person and an investor and as a parent to sort of mitigate those negative influences.
Yeah, well, I quoted, I think Kay Graham was quoting her father at the time, but some years back as saying, if you're quite rich, probably the idea of leaving your children enough so they can do anything but not enough so they can do nothing is not a bad formula. I think if you're talking about people that aren't quite rich, I've seen, socially I wouldn't have a system that involved inheritances, but recognizing the situation that exists, I think probably at lower levels that leaving to the children in this society is perfectly okay. But I believe enough in a meritocracy that if I were devising the system with a consumption tax and everything, I would probably make inheritance a form of consumption, and it would be very heavily taxed, because I don't believe that because you happen to come out of the right womb, essentially, that you were entitled to live an entirely different life than somebody who wasn't quite as lucky in terms of womb selection. But in my own case, I follow enough so they can do anything, but not enough so they can do nothing. I think that society showered all these. I was very lucky. I was wired the right way at the right time in history to do very well in this kind of a market economy where, as Bill Gates has told me, if I was born some thousands of years ago, I'd been some animal's lunch. I don't run very fast, and there are different assets that are useful at different times, and I'm not wired to play championship bridge or championship chess, or I'm not wired to be a basketball star or anything. It just so happens I'm in an area where it pays off like crazy to be good at capital allocation, and that doesn't make me a more worthwhile human being than anybody else or anything. It just means I was lucky, and should that luck enable many generations of people that I would have some reservations about that. So that's my own feeling on inheritance. But Charlie has a bigger family, and he can give you a better answer.
Well, I feel in a capitalist system that there should be an inheritance tax, and that once that's been imposed and paid, what each person wants to do in his own testamentary arrangements is up to that person. I see very few people that I regard as ruined by money. Many of the people that I see ruined who have money would have been ruined without money. And I think the percentage of the people that are going to be living the life of the French aristocracy before the revolution is always going to be very small, and ruling the world as their money cascades ever higher. So I like a fair amount of charity, and certainly some testamentary charity is okay. But I feel it's an individual choice that people have to make.
They get a choice there. Number 9.
Good afternoon. My name is Jamie Harmon, and I'm from Boston. You say that companies should only spend $1 on capital expenditures if it will create more than $1 of market value. I'm wondering, how do you determine this? Is it based on A, historical returns on capital, B, a qualitative judgment of the company's competitive position, a quantitative projection of the returns on capital, or D, something else?
We can say, to date, every dollar we've retained has been worthwhile, because on balance, those dollars have produced more than $1 of market value, and it's actually, with a great many companies, you could say that now, because things have turned out so well. But it would be a case. The check on it is if after 3 or 4 years you found that the dollars we retained haven't created more of that in value, then the presumption becomes very strong at that point that we should start paying out money. But almost any management that wants to retain money is going to rationalize it by saying we're going to do wonderful things with the money we retain. And we think there should be checks on that, which is why in the report, in the ground rules, I suggest making checks on the validity of those projections. Charlie and I, if you asked us today whether the single dollar we retain from the earnings today we've got a use for today that will produce more than $1 of value, the answer is no. We do think that based on history that the prospects are that better than 50%, well over 50%, that in the next few years we would have an opportunity to do that. But there's no certainty to it. Charlie?
Nothing more.
Okay. Area 1, please. Charlie?
Good afternoon, Mr. Buffett and Mr. Munger. My name is Jack Sutton from New York City. I have 2 questions. The Japanese stock market has been likened to the U.S. market in 1974. with Japanese stocks selling at very low price-to-book values as compared to U.S. stocks, would it not make sense to invest in a basket of Japanese stocks or an index fund of Japanese stocks? Question number 2. Berkshire Hathaway tends to invest in companies with high margins and high return on common equity. Berkshire's investment in the airline business seems to have digressed widely from those principles. Could you elaborate on why Berkshire invested in the airline industry, and would Berkshire consider new investments in the industry in the future?
Going to the first question, the reason that, and I don't know the exact figures, the Japanese stocks would sell at a lower price-book ratio than U.S. stocks is simply because Japanese companies are earning far less on book than American companies, and earnings are what determine value, not book value. Book value is not a factor we consider. Future earnings are a factor we consider, and as we mentioned earlier this morning, earnings have been poor for a great many Japanese companies. Now, if you think that the return on equity of Japanese business is going to increase dramatically, then you're going to make a lot of money. I mean, and you're correct, you're going to make a lot of money in Japanese stocks, but the return on equity for Japanese businesses has been quite low, and that makes a low price to book ratio very, very appropriate, because earnings are measured against book. And if a company's earning 5% on book value, I don't want to buy it at book value if I think it's going to keep earning 5% on book value. So a low price book ratio means nothing to us. It does not intrigue us. In fact, if anything, we are less likely to look at something that sells at a low relationship to book than something that sells at a high relationship to book, because the chances are we're looking at a poor business in the first case and a good business in the second case. What was the other question on, Charlie?
Buying it.
Airlines. Oh, yes, I always repress everything on airlines. I don't want to. We've never bought an airline common stock that I can remember. So what we did was we lent money to U.S. Air for a 10-year period, and we had a conversion privilege there. It looked like it was a terrible mistake. I made the mistake, but we got bailed out. But we never made the determination. When we bought our stock, U.S. Air was selling at $50 a share or thereabouts, the common. And we didn't have an interest in buying U.S. Air at 50 or 40 or 30 or 20. And we got a chance to as things went along, all the way down to 4. And we never bought it. And we never bought American or United or Delta or any other airline. It is not a business that intrigues us. We did think it was intriguing to lend money to them with a conversion privilege, and it's worked out now because we got lucky, and because Steve Wolf came along and really rescued the company from right at the brink of bankruptcy. But we're unlikely to be in airlines, although, again, we wouldn't mind lending money to a lot of businesses that we wouldn't buy common equity in. I mean, that could happen again in various industries, including the airline industry. Charlie, do you have anything to say on either the airlines or the Japanese market?
Well, the airline experience was very unpleasant for us. The net worth just melted. It was like $1.5 billion, and it just went 100 million, 100 million, 100 million. And finally the cash is running down. It is a very unpleasant experience. And we try and learn from those experiences, but we're very slow learners.
Yvonne Edmonds from Cedar Mountain, North Carolina. I have a specific question, but not a trivial one. You regularly compare Berkshire Hathaway's performance to the S&P 500, which is very helpful and very interesting. But I haven't seen a correlation coefficient between the S&P 500 daily, from day-to-day performance, close, say, and Berkshire Hathaway's close. Now, it so happens for me, and I'm sure some other people in the audience, that I don't always have access to newspapers, or the internet for that matter, newspapers that publish Berkshire Hathaway performance on a daily basis, or even a weekly basis for that matter, or a monthly basis. It would be very helpful to know the extent of a correlation coefficient between those two variables. If you have that, would you let us know what it is? And if you don't, would you please consider calculating it in the future?
Well, it could be calculated, but I don't think it would have much meaning. I mean, it would be an historical correlation coefficient, which, you know, I would be very reluctant to have people place any weight in. I try to indicate even the limitations of the yearly comparison of the relative performance, because what was doable by us in the past is not doable today. I mentioned in my annual report the best decade I ever had on comparative performance by far was the 50s. Now, I don't think it was because I was a lot smarter then. I'm unwilling to accept that. But, you know, I had some edge of, well, there's probably 40 plus points per year. But I was working with it. That has no relevance to today whatsoever. It would be misleading to publish it or to make calculations based on it. So I think that you would find, I don't know what you'd find on a specific correlation between Berkshire and the S&P. You'd find a lot of correlation. Well, you might not find so much even. You'd find it in intrinsic value between that and Coke and a few stocks like that. But I don't really think that's particularly useful information going forward. We'd have no objection. Anybody wants to make the calculation, but it wouldn't be something that would be of any utility to us. And if we don't think it's of utility to us, we don't want to put it out for shareholders as being a possible utility. We do think that the S&P annual calculation has some meaning because it's an alternative for people to invest. They don't need us to buy the S&P. So unless over time we have some advantage over that, you know, what are we contributing? What value is added by our management? So we think that people should hold us accountable, even though we would prefer not to be, because that it is a tough comparison for us as a tax-paying entity against the pre-tax calculation on the S&P. But we don't pay any attention to beta or any of that sort of thing. It just doesn't mean anything to us. We're only interested in price and value, and that's what we're focusing on all the time. And any kind of market movements or anything don't mean anything. I don't know what Berkshire is selling for today, and it really makes no difference. You know, it just doesn't make any difference. What does count is where it is 10 years from now. And I can't tell you what it was selling for on May 4th, 1983 or May 4th, 1986. So I don't care what it sells for on May 4th, 1998. I do care, you know, where it is in general 10 years from now. And that's where all the focus is. Charlie?
Yeah, we're publishing data in the form where we would like it if we were the passive shareholder. And so you're getting the data and you're getting it on a time schedule based on what we would want if we were in your position. And we don't think the correlation coefficients would help us.
We don't think anything that relates either to volume, price action, relative strength, any of that sort of thing. And bear in mind, when I was in my teens, I used to eat that stuff up. I mean, I was making calculations based on it all the time and kept charts on it and even wrote an article or two on it. But it just has no place in the operation now.
One of the pleasant things about dealing with Warren all these years is he's never talked about a correlation coefficient. If the correlation isn't so extreme you can see it with the naked eye, he doesn't compute it.
My question has to do with what you mentioned earlier about how companies have to reinvest a certain amount of cash in their business every year just to stay in place. And if one could say that the best businesses are the ones that not only throw off lots of cash, but can reinvest it in more capacity. But I suppose the paradox is that the better a company's opportunities for making expansionary capital expenditures, the worse they appear to be as consumers of cash rather than generators of cash. What specific techniques have you used to figure out the maintenance capital expenditures that you need to do in order to figure out how much cash a company is throwing off? What techniques have you used on Gillette or other companies that you've studied?
Well, if you look at a company such as Gillette or Coke, you won't find great differences between their depreciation. Forget about amortization for the moment, but depreciation and sort of the required capital expenditures. If we got into a hyperinflationary period, or I mean, you can set up cases where that wouldn't be true, but by and large, the depreciation charge is not inappropriate in most companies to use as a proxy for required capital expenditures, which is why we think that reported earnings plus amortization of intangibles usually gives a pretty good indication of earning power. And I've never given a thought to whether Gillette needs to spend $100 million more, $100 million less than depreciation in order to maintain its competitive position. But I would guess the range is even considerably less than that versus its recorded depreciation. The businesses you have to worry about, I mean, an airline business is a good case. In airlines, you just have to keep spending money like crazy, and you have to spend money like crazy if it's attractive to spend money, and you have to spend it the same way if it's unattractive. It's part of the game. Even in our textile business, to stay competitive, we would have needed to spend substantial money without any clear prospects of making any money when we got through spending it. And those are real traps, those kind of businesses, and they may work out one way or another, but they're dangerous. And in a See's candy, we would love to be able to spend $10 million, $100 million, $500 million and get anything like the returns we've gotten in the past. But there aren't good ways to do it, unfortunately. We'll keep looking. But it's not a business where capital produces the profits. At flight safety, capital produces the profits. You need more simulators as you go along, and more pilots are to be trained, and so capital is required to produce profits. But it's just not the case at See's. And at Coca-Cola, particularly when new markets come along, the Chinas of the world or East Germany or something of the sort, the Coca-Cola company itself would frequently make the investments needed to build up the bottling infrastructure to rapidly capitalize on those markets, the old Soviet Union. So those are expenditures. You don't even make the calculation on them. You just know you've got to do it. You've got a wonderful business and you want to have it spread worldwide, and you want to capitalize on it to its fullest. And you can make a return on investment calculation, but as far as I'm concerned, it's a waste of time because you're going to do it anyway. And you want to dominate those markets over time. And eventually, you'll probably fold those investments into other bottling systems as the market gets developed. But you don't want to wait for conventional bottlers to do it. You want to be there. One of the ironies, incidentally, it might get a kick out of some of the older members of the audience, that when the Berlin Wall went down and Coke was there that day with Coca-Cola for East Germany, that Coke came from the bottling plant at Dunkirk. So there was a certain poetic irony there. Charlie, do you have anything on that?
I've heard Warren say since very early in his life that the difference between a good business and a bad business is usually that a good business just throws up one easy decision after another, whereas the bad business gives you a horrible choice where the decision is hard to make. And is this really going to work? Is it worth the money? If you want a system for determining which is a good business and which is a bad business, just see which one is throwing the management bloopers time after time after time. Easy decisions. It is not very hard for us to decide to open a new Sears store in a new shopping center in California that's obviously going to succeed. It's a blooper. On the other hand, there are plenty of businesses where the decisions that come across your desk are just awful. And those businesses, by and large, don't work very well.
I've been on the board of Coke now for 10 years, and we've had project after project come up, and there's always an ROI, but it doesn't really make much difference to me because in the end, almost any decision you make that solidifies and extends the dominance of Coke around the world in an industry that's growing by a significant percentage and which has great inherent underlying profitability, the decisions are going to be right. And you've got people there that will execute them well.
You're saying you get blooper after blooper.
Yeah. And then Charlie and I sat on US Air, and the decisions would come along, and it would be a question of, you know, do you buy the Eastern Shuttle or whatever it may be, and you're running out of money, and yet to play the game and to keep the traffic flows such as with connecting passengers and everything, you just have to continually make these decisions, whether you spend $100 million more on some airport, and they're agony, because, again, you don't have any real choice. But you also don't have any real conviction that it's going to translate, those choices are going to, or lack of choices, are going to translate themselves into real money later on. So one game is just forcing you to push more money into the table with no idea of what kind of a hand you hold. And the other one, you get a chance to push more money in, knowing that you've got a winning hand all the way. Charlie? Why'd we buy US Air? Could have bought more Coke. Area 7.
My name is Hubert Vos. I'm from Santa Barbara, California. Earlier this morning, you made a comment that if the market fell, you would be spending less time on the internet because you'd be very busy. And this has reinforced an impression I have had that the cash flows of Berkshire Hathaway are enormous, but that possibly in the last 12 months, you've been investing less than you had previously. And if so, if this is correct, what does that say about waiting for attractive values? How long are you willing to wait? And what does that say to the investment public in their own habits?
Well, you're correct that we have not found anything to speak of in equities in a good many months. And the question of how long we wait, we wait indefinitely. We are not going to buy anything just to buy something. We will only buy something if we think we're getting something attractive. And incidentally, if things were 5% cheaper, that or 10% cheaper, that wouldn't change anything materially. So we won't feel we've missed anything particularly if returns stay where they are. Because if it turns out that these levels are okay, they still will not produce great returns from here in our view. That doesn't mean you couldn't have a tremendous market in the short term or something of the sort. You know, markets can do anything. I mean, you look at the history of markets and you just see everything under the sun. But we will not, you know, we have no time frame. If the money piles up, the money piles up. And when we see something that makes sense, we're willing to act very fast, very big. But we're not willing to act on anything that doesn't check out in our view. You don't get paid for activity. You only get paid for being right. Charlie?
Yeah, an occasional dull stretch for new buying. This is no great tragedy in an investment lifetime. And other things may be possible in such an era too. I mean, it isn't like we have a quiver with only one arrow.
We sat through periods before. I mean, the most dramatic one being the early 70s, late 60s and early 70s. For a long time, it doesn't seem so long when you look back on it. It seems long when you're going through it, but it's like having a tooth pulled or something. But it's, you know, what can you do about it? The businesses aren't going to perform better in the future just because you got antsy and decided you had to buy something. We will wait till we find something we like. We'll love it when we can swing in a big way, though. That's our style. Area 1?
Larry Pikowski, Millburn, New Jersey. Berkshire seems never to have made any pure real estate investments. with the not counting facilities the operating companies might own, with the exception of Wesco's involvement in the residential project in California. I was wondering if you've ever looked at a real estate transaction and tried to apply the same filters, meaning competitive advantages, returns on capital, that you do in operating companies. And if not, is it a circle of competence issue, or is there something you find disinteresting about real estate?
You want to take it? Okay, Charlie wants to take this one.
Let me take this one, because here's a area where we have a perfect record that extends over many decades. We have been demonstrably foolish in almost every operation that had to do with real estate we've ever touched. Every time we had a surplus plant and didn't want to hit the bid and let some developer kind of take an unfair advantage of us, we would have been better off later if we'd hit the bid and invested the money in fields where we had the expertise. That housing track that I developed because I didn't want to let the zoning authorities rob me the way they wanted to. I wish I had let them. We have a certified record of failure in this field.
And the funny thing is, we understand real estate.
Yeah, and we're good at it. Right.
But that actually is a correct aside. We do understand real estate. And Charlie got to start in real estate.
Yeah, but we understand other things better. And so the chances that we're going to be big in real estate are low.
Yeah. We've seen lots of things, and the prices just don't intrigue us in terms of what we get for our money. I tried to buy a town when I was 21 years old. The U.S. government had a town in Ohio for sale, and would have worked out very well. There's nothing about the arena that turns us off, but we don't see great returns available, and like Charlie says, the few things, particularly having an old plant or something, we have not been great at working our way out of those. Fortunately, they haven't been very important in relation to the net worth of Berkshire. Area 2.
My name is Travis Keith. I'm from Dallas, Texas, and my question regards what Philip Fisher referred to as scuttlebutt. When you've identified a business that you consider to warrant further investigation, more intense investigation, how much time do you spend commonly, both in terms of total hours and in terms of the span in weeks or months that you perform that investigation over?
Well, the answer to that question is that now I spend practically none because I've done it in the past. And one advantage of allocating capital is that an awful lot of what you do is cumulative in nature, so that you do get continuing benefits out of things that you've done earlier. So by now, most of the businesses that might qualify. But when I started out, and for a long time, I used to do a lot of what Phil Fisher described. I followed his scuttlebutt method, and I don't think you can do too much of it. Now, the general premise of why you're interested in something should be 80% of it or thereabouts. I mean, you don't want to be chasing down every idea that way, so you should have a strong presumption. You should be like a basketball coach who runs into a 7-footer on the street. I mean, you're interested to start with. Now you got to find out if you can keep him in school, if he's coordinated and all that sort of thing. That's the scuttlebutt aspect of it. But I believe that as you're acquiring knowledge about industries in general, companies specifically, that there really isn't anything like first doing some reading about them and then getting out and talking to competitors and customers and suppliers and ex-employees and current employees and whatever it may be. And you will learn a lot. But it should be the last 20% or 10%. I mean, you don't want to get too impressed by that, because you really want to start with a business where you think the economics are good, where they look like 7-footers, and then you want to go out with a scuttlebutt approach to possibly reject your original hypothesis, or maybe and if you confirm it, maybe do it even more strongly. I did that with American Express back in the 60s, and essentially the scuttlebutt approach so reinforced my feeling about it that I kept buying more and more and more as I went along. If you talk to a bunch of people in an industry and you ask them what competitor they fear the most and why they fear them and all of that sort of thing, you know, who would they use the silver bullet of Andy Groves on and so on, you're going to learn a lot about it. You'll probably know more about the industry than most of the people in it when you get through, because you'll bring an independent perspective to it, and you'll be listening to everything everyone says rather than coming in and with these preconceived notions and just sort of listening to your own troops after a while. And I advise it. I don't really do it much anymore. I do it a little bit, and I talked in the annual report about how when we made the decision on keeping the American Express, when we exchanged our perks for common stock in 1994, I was using the scuttlebutt approach when I talked to Frank Olson. I couldn't have talked to a better guy than Frank Olson. Frank Olson, running Hertz Corporation, lots of experience at United Airlines, and a consumer marketing guy by nature. I mean, he understands business, and when I asked him how strong the American Express card was, I mean, he could give me an answer in 5 hours than I could accomplish in hours and hours and hours or weeks of roaming around and doing other things. So you can learn from people, and Frank was a user of it. I mean, Frank was paying X percent to American Express for his Hertz cars, and Frank doesn't like to pay out money, so why was he paying that? And if he was paying more than he was paying on MasterCharge or Visa, why was he paying more? And what could he do about it? I mean, you just keep asking questions. And I guess Davey explained that in that video we had ahead of time. I'm very grateful to him for doing that, because that was a real effort for him. But that was really what I was doing back in 1951 when I visited him down in Washington, because I was trying to figure out why people would insure with Geico rather than with the companies that they were already insuring with, and how permanent that advantage was, and you know, what other things could you do with that advantage? And you know, there were just a lot of questions I wanted to ask him, and he was terrific in giving me the answers. It you know, changed my life in a major way. So I've got nobody to thank but Davey on that. But that's the scuttlebutt method, and I do advise it. Charlie?
Nothing to add.
Area 6.
Good afternoon, Mr. Buffett and Mr. Munger. My name is Keiko Mihalik, and I'm an MBA student at Wharton, but please don't hold that against me.
We won't. I never made it that far. I was an undergraduate student.
Could you please explain how you differentiate between types of businesses in your cash flow valuation process, given that you use the same discount rate across companies? For example, in valuing Coke and Geico, how do you account for the difference in the riskiness of their cash flows?
We don't worry about risk in the traditional, the way you're taught actually at Wharton. But it's a good question. Believe me. But if we could see the future of every business perfectly, it wouldn't make any difference whether the money came from running streetcars or from selling software, because all the cash that came out, which is all we're measuring between now and Judgment Day, would spend the same to us. The industry that it's earned in means nothing except to the extent that it may tell you something about the ability to develop the cash, but it doesn't tell you, it has no meaning on the quality of the cash once it becomes distributable. We look at riskiness essentially as being sort of a go, no-go valve in terms of looking at the future of businesses. In other words, if we think we simply don't know what's going to happen in the future, that doesn't mean it's necessarily risky. It just means we don't know. It means it's risky for us. It may not be risky for someone else who understands the business. In that case, we just give up. We don't try to predict those things. And we don't say, well, we don't know what's going to happen, so therefore we'll discount it at 9% instead of 7%, some number that we don't even know. That is not our way to approach it. We feel that once it passed the threshold test of being something about which we feel quite certain, that the same discount factor tends to apply to everything. And we try to do only things about which we're quite certain when we buy into to businesses. So We think all the capital asset pricing model type reasoning with different rates of risk-adjusted return and all that, we tend to think it is, well, we don't tend to, we think it is nonsense. But we do think it's also nonsense to get into situations or to try and evaluate situations where we don't have any conviction to speak of as to what the future is going to look like. And we don't think you can compensate for that by having a higher discount rate and saying it's riskier so that I don't really know what's going to happen, I'll have a higher discount rate. That just is not our way of approaching things. Charlie?
Yeah, this great emphasis on volatility in corporate finance, we just regard as nonsense. Put it this way. As long as the odds are in our favor, and we're not risking the whole company on one throw or anything close to it, we don't mind volatility in results. What we want is the favorable odds. We figure the volatility over time will take care of itself at Berkshire.
If we have a business about which we're extremely confident as to the business result, we would prefer that it have high volatility than low volatility. We will make more money out of a business where we know where the end game is going to be if it bounces around a lot. I mean, for example, if people reacted to the monthly earnings of C's, which might lose money 8 months out of the year and makes a fortune, you know, in November and December, if people reacted to that and therefore made its stock as an independent company very volatile, that would be terrific for us because we would know it was all nonsense, and we would buy in July and sell in January. Well, obviously things don't behave that way, but when we see a business about which we're very certain, but the world thinks that its fortunes are going up and down, and therefore it behaves with great volatility, you know, we love it. That's way better than having a lower beta. So we think that we actually would prefer what other people would call risk. When we bought the Washington Post, I've used that as, you know, it went down 50% in a matter of a few months. Best thing that could have happened. I mean, that doesn't get any better than that. Business was fundamentally very non-volatile in nature. I mean, TV stations and a strong dominant newspaper, that's a non-volatile business, but it was a volatile stock. And, you know, that is a great combination from our standpoint. Area 8.
My name is Steve Check. I'm from Southern California, and my question has to deal with kind of quality versus price. I've been to 3 annual meetings and have heard great things about Coke every year, but as far as I'm aware, you have not bought any additional shares of Coke over the last 3 years, even though the stock has done just fine. If an investor has a relatively short time frame, say 3 to 5 years, how much weight do you think one should give to quality versus price?
Well, if your time frame is 3 to 5 years, I wouldn't advise it being that way, because I think if you think you're going to get out then, it gets more leaning toward the bigger fool theory. The best way to look at any investment is how will I feel if I own it forever, you know, and put all my family's net worth in it. But we basically believe in buying, if you talk about quality, meaning the certainty that the business will perform as you expect it to perform over a period of time, so the range of possible performance is fairly narrow. You know, that's the kind of business we like to buy, and all I can say is that we like to pay a comfortable price, and that depends to some extent on what interest rates are. We haven't found comfortable prices for the kind of businesses we like in the last year. We don't find them uncomfortable in the sense that we want to sell them, but they're not prices at which we added to Coke one time about, I don't know, 5 years ago or thereabouts, and it's conceivable we would add again. It's a lot more conceivable we would add and subtract. But that's the way we feel about most of the businesses. We did make a decision last year that we thought bonds were relatively attractive, and we trimmed certain holdings and eliminated certain small holdings in order to make a bigger commitment in bonds. Charlie?
Yeah, you talk about quality versus price. The investment game always involves considering both quality and price, and the trick is to get more quality than you're paying for in the price. It's just that simple.
But not easy.
No, but not easy.
Area 10.
Good afternoon, Mr. Buffett and Mr. Munger. I was kind of curious if you could tell me, do you know or can you tell us how much business Nebraska Furniture Mart and investing in the auto industry? And if not interested now, what would change your mind about this industry in the future?
Well, the first question, I don't know what the Mart did, but I do know they had a lot of shareholders there. I've gotten that verbal report on that. They do, you know, you're talking about a company that at the Mart that does $800,000 a day on average. It is a big operation. So our shareholders have an impact, but not the relative impact that they would have at Borsheim. Borsheim's did over twice as much this year as last year, and they had a big day. And what was the other question, Charlie?
Industry. The auto industry.
Oh, the auto industry. Yeah, Charlie was big in General Motors in the mid-'60s, right, Charlie? And was your biggest commitment?
I had a temper. Luckily, it passed.
Yeah. No, he made money on it.
Yes, I did.
It's the kind of industry it's interesting for us to follow. I mean, many years ago, it was the dominant factor or overwhelming factor in the economy. It's diminished a fair amount, but it's still a very important industry, and it's the kind of industry that anyone can follow. I mean, you have experience with the product and competing products, and everyone in this room understands in a general way the economic nature of the industry, but we've never felt that we understood it better than other people. So we've seen auto companies at very low multiples sometimes, and with prices that in hindsight look very attractive, but we've never really felt that we knew who among the auto companies 5 years from now would have gained the most ground relative to where they are now, or to gain the most ground relative to what the market might expect. It just isn't given to us, that knowledge. Charlie?
I agree.
Area 2.
My name is George Gatti from Zurich, Switzerland, and my question refers to two food businesses, namely McDonald's and Dairy Queen. Are there major differences in the investment characteristics between McDonald's and Dairy Queen? And if yes, would you explain them?
Yeah, there are major differences. McDonald's, I can't tell you the exact percentage, but if they've got 23,000 outlets, they own many, many thousands of them and operate them. And then of the remainder, they own a very high percentage and lease them to their operators, their franchisees. So they have a very large investment on which they get very good returns in physical facilities all over the world. Dairy Queen has, counting Orange Julius, 6,000 plus operations, of which 30-odd are operated by the company, and even those, some are in joint ventures or partnerships. So the investment in fixed assets is dramatically different between the two. The fixed assets investment by the franchisee or the person as landlord obviously is significant at a Dairy Queen, but it's not significant to the company as the franchisor. So that the capital employed in Dairy Queen is relatively small compared to the capital employed in McDonald's, but McDonald's also makes a lot of money out of owning those locations and receives, whereas Dairy Queen will in most cases receive 4% of the franchisee's sales in terms of a royalty. At a McDonald's, there's that more than that percentage plus rentals and so on. So they're two very different economic models. They both depend on the success of the franchisee in the end. I mean, you have to have a good business for the franchisee to over time have a good business for the parent company. Both companies have that. Charlie?
Is not very much when you stop to think about providing a group of franchisees with a nationally recognized brand and quality control all sorts of desirable business aids.
No, 4% is at the low. If you look at the whole industry, 4% is on the is in the lower part of the range. But
part of
it
what
works
attracted
fine.
us. Part of what attracted us was the fact that
sell his operation for significantly more than he has invested in tangible assets, and we want it that way, obviously, because that means he's got a successful business, and it means that over time we will have a successful business. You want a franchise operator. You want the franchise operator to make money, and you want him to create a capital asset that's worth more than he's put in it. That's the goal. Area 4.
Good afternoon, Mr. Munger and Mr. Buffett. My name is Patrick Byrne. I'm a shareholder, and I'm here from Cincinnati, Ohio. Back again this year to ask a question to see if I can get the two of you to disagree on a subject. I've picked education as an area where we might see some daylight between the two of you. First, though, on the subject of education, I'd like to offer some brief thanks. I'm lucky in that my parents in the late 70s made a wise choice of buying some Berkshire stock and putting it in a college fund for my brothers and me, and that basically paid for our higher education. I suspect there must be thousands of people like us who had our education paid for by wealth that the two of you created, and we owe you, although we'd probably all have been a lot better to skip college and keep the stock. Well, on the subject of education, Milton Friedman has said, or has written, that if you really care about poverty in the U.S. and the disadvantage of women and minorities and so on, and you could cure one single thing in the U.S., it would be the public education system. Mr. Buffett, of course, you've been very publicly supportive and done many things, and I'm sure Mr. Munger has as well, for public education. And I noticed last year in this annual meeting, Mr. Munger, well, both of you business schools, but Mr. Munger, he was a tad critical, I would say, of the U.S. public education system. And I wonder if you two agree with what Friedman says and what you think the importance of public education is and what might be done to improve it.
I'm going to let Charlie go in a second, but I just want to say Patrick Byrne is the son of Jack Byrne, who made a fortune for us by resuscitating Geico when it got into trouble in the mid-'70s. In fact, I met Patrick's dad on a Wednesday night about 8 o'clock at night in Washington when Geico was bankrupt, and it was very close to being declared so. And after talking with about 3 hours that night, the next day I went out and bought 500-some thousand shares of Geico that Davey referred to at 2 1/8, so which is 40 cents on the stock that we paid $70 for later on. So Patrick's dad, we may have made the Byrne family a little money. He made us a lot of money. Patrick is now running Fetchheimer's in Cincinnati and doing a sensational job. His brother Mark, on June 30th, if we hit the target date, will be establishing a major operation in London and Bermuda that will in which we will be a very large partner. So he's only got one other brother left, and he's out playing golf in California, but if times get tough, we're going to try and recruit him too. Now, Charlie, with all that time to prepare, what do you have to say about education?
Well, I certainly agree with Milton Friedman that it would be hard to name one factor, if we could fix it, that would be more worthy of fixing than particularly the in education, where the failures are so horrible in many big cities particularly. So yes, I think it's a terrible problem, and it needs fixing. Of course, there's a huge debate as to what the best way is to fix it, and I am skeptical myself of big city school systems getting fixed under their own momentums. In other words, I'm quite sympathetic to the people who say we may have to go to an alternative like vouchers. That the incentive structure has gotten so bad in some places that you can't fix it with evolution. It takes revolution. Warren, you're more optimistic about
well,
I'm
not necessarily more optimistic. I probably feel, though, that democracy without a good public school system available to the entire population is sort of a mockery, because there's so much inequality to start with. I mean, it isn't just an inequality of money, but I mean, my kids, whether they inherit any money, or your kids, whether they inherit any money, compared to the kids of somebody where both parents are struggling to keep the place going, or maybe just one parent and living in poverty. I mean, it is so unequal to start with that giving those who are generally higher up, who have chosen the wrong womb, I think that's just, I don't think the society should tolerate that, or a rich society should tolerate it. That doesn't mean it's easy to solve, because I've said a lot of times that, unfortunately, it seems like a good public school system is like virginity, that it can be preserved but not restored. And it's very hard when you get a system that's lousy to do much about it, because under those circumstances, the wealthy people are going to all opt out of the system, and they're going to be less interested in the bond issues. They're going to be less interested in the PTA. They're going to be less interested in the other people's children if they have all opted out, and another for the poor. With the poor being getting the poorer system strikes me as doing nothing but accentuating inequality and other problems that result from that in the future. So I don't know the answers on improving the system. I read some of the experiments that take place, but I do believe, to start with, that if you have a good public school system, as we do in Omaha, that you do your damnedest to maintain that, so that there is no incentive for the rich grandparent or the rich parent to say, I love the idea of equality, but I love my grandchildren or my child more, so I'm going to yank him from the public school system. And then you get this sort of exodus, which leaves behind only those who can't afford to make that choice. If there were a way, the idea of competition I like, and I think a good parochial system does, for example, create a better public system, and I think we've had that situation in Omaha. But I think the voucher system, if it simply amounts to giving everyone an additional amount, simply means that the rich get X dollars of the public school system subsidized, but the poor still, or whatever that differential is, remains. I mean, you could have a golf voucher system, because I play golf. I don't play very often, but if I play at the Omaha Country Club, then you could have a voucher system so that everybody in Omaha would have more access to I don't think there's anything more important, and I agree with Charlie totally. I think the first 8 grades, you can forget it after that. If you have the first 8 grades right, good things are going to flow, and if you have those wrong, you're not going to correct it as you get beyond that point. $500 million, I think it is very tough to see results. Producing results, I think it should be replicated elsewhere. I think that, obviously, a fellow in Chicago says that the unions have caused considerable problems in getting adjustments made, but he had the political clout behind him to overcome some of those problems. It ought to be a top national priority. We have the money to educate everybody well in this country, and the question is if we got, can we? And that's something I hope good minds like Patrick's work on. Charlie, you have anything for that?
Yeah. I think when something is demonstrably failing at performing the function to which it's assigned by a civilization, just to keep pouring more and more money into a failing modality is not the Munger system. So I'm all for taking the worst places where there's failure and trying a new modality. And it wouldn't bother me at all to have vouchers only for the poor. But I think we have to do something in our most troubled schools to change our techniques. I think it's insane to keep going the way we are.
So you go for means-tested vouchers, basically.
Well,
I don't disagree with that idea.
But all I know is where it is a terrible place to fail, and part of the trouble is ideological. If you have a absolute rule, there can't be any tracking by ability, no matter how much better reading can measurably be taught by systems that involve tracking. Well, people that brain blocked shouldn't have the power. You know, we should do what works.
No, we got plenty. I mean, all it works. The problem is that once it gets beyond a certain point on a downhill slope, essentially you have the citizens that are able to do something about it essentially opt out, and that I don't know.
I am a product of the Omaha Public Schools, and in my day, the people who went to private schools were those who couldn't quite hack it in the public schools. That is still the situation in Germany today. I mean, private schools are people who aren't up to the public schools. I prefer a system like that. But once a big segment of that system measurably fails, then I think you have to do something. You don't just keep repeating what isn't working.
Well, I agree with that. Patrick, have you gotten your answer? Let's go to Area 5.
My name is Kevin Murphy. I'm from Camarillo, California, and my question is, what do you look for when determining if a person is honest or not?
Well, that's a good question, Kevin. I think generally Charlie and I can do pretty well with the situations we see, but we have to have some evidence of behavior in front of us, and I would say even there's some occupations where we're going to expect to find a higher percentage of people who behave well than in others. But if we work with someone over a period of a few months or more, I think we can come up with a pretty high batting average in terms of how they behave. At Solomon, I think I was able to separate out the people who I felt very good about and the people I was a little more nervous about fairly quickly among the ones I worked with actively. But how you spot that precisely, leave your lunch money on their desk sometime. Yeah, maybe you'll find out in a hurry. But we like people. The great example, is somebody like a Tom Murphy, where they're just bending over backwards all the time to make sure that you get the better end of the deal, or that doesn't mean they aren't competitive. I mean, if you play him a golf game for money or something like that, he wants to win the worst way. But there are people that they don't take credit for things that they didn't do. In fact, they give you credit for some of the things that maybe they did, and you can get a feel for it over time. Charlie, you have any good guidelines on that?
Yes, I think that people leave track records in life, and so somebody at your age should figure that by the time he's 22 or 3, well, he will have left quite a track record, and the world will be able to figure you out. So I think track records are very important, and if you start early trying to have a perfect record and in some simple thing like honesty, you're well on the way to success in this world.
Johnny Agnelli one time told me, he said, when you get older, you have the reputation you deserve. He said, you can get away with it for a while early on, but by the time anybody gets to be 60 or so, they very probably have the reputation you deserve. And the truth is, you can have the reputation that you want. If you list all of the things that you admire in other people, you'll find out that almost everything you list, you may not be able to kick a football 60 yards or something of that sort, but almost everything you list in the people that you admire and like they're qualities that you can have if you just set out to do that. And didn't Ben Franklin do that, Charlie?
No, sure. I always say that to get what you want is to deserve what you want.
I'll have some more peanut brittle. Area 6.
In your description of McDonald's, you have the sense that there's a great business buried in McDonald's, and there are two good businesses that are mixed in with it. And the problem is with the real estate and the operational business, that as the company is currently capitalized, they can't earn the same kind of returns they can earn in the franchising business. You were or still are a significant shareholder of McDonald's. I guess my question is, the solution is obvious. Why don't you push for a solution that creates the same opportunity you have at International Dairy Queen?
Well, my guess is, I don't know the details on it, but my guess is that with 23,000 locations all over the world, I think it would be extraordinarily difficult to separate the real estate business out from the franchising business at this point. I think they could have gone a different route. I'm not saying it would have been a better route at all. In fact, I think the odds are they followed the right route in owning and controlling so much real estate. But I just think the problems would be horrendous. Certainly you wouldn't want to sell it and lease it back, because you would not end up with more value, in my view, by doing that. And spinning it off in a real estate trust or something with operating in 100 plus countries, and with all of the franchise arrangements, I think it would be a huge problem. I would not want to tackle it myself. So I think that you should look at McDonald's, and I don't know anything about their plans on this, but I think you should look at McDonald's as being a very good business, but the one that will continue in its present mode vis-a-vis the real estate, although I think they've signaled that they're going to do less on new properties, somewhat less in connection with ownership than they've done to this point. But there's 23,000 locations out there, and every operator, his own arrangement is very important to him, and it would be a mammoth job, and I'm not sure how much extra value would be created in the end anyway. Charlie?
Yeah, the net returns on capital McDonald's has earned all these years are high, even though they have owned a lot of the real estate. I think it's hard to quarrel with the way they did it. They had the best record.
And the multiple is not greatly different, in my view, than if the real estate were separate. I mean, now if you get all the real estate de-taxed in some arrangement, you might get a little more out of it, but it doesn't strike me as a big deal. But, Area 8.
Good afternoon. My name is Fred Strassheim, and I'm from here in Omaha. I have a question about your acquisition methodology. And I was intrigued to read in your annual report about your acquisition of Star Furniture. And as I understand the process you followed, Mr. Buffett, you met with you reviewed financials for a brief period, liked what you saw. Then you met with Mr. Melvin Wolf for 2 hours and struck a deal. And you wrote you had no need to check leases, work out employment contracts, etc.
Right.
I think that most companies, when they do acquisitions, would feel the need to do a significant amount of legal due diligence, to do things like check the leases, check into things like undisclosed environmental liability, or perhaps threaten litigation. And I guess my question is, have you ever been burned by your approach?
We've never been burned by we've been burned only in the sense that we've made mistakes on judging the future economics of the business, which would have had nothing to do with due diligence. We regard what people normally refer to due diligence as really sort of boilerplate in most cases. It's a process that big companies go through, and they feel they have to go through it, and they're ignoring, oftentimes in our view, they're ignoring what really counts, which is evaluating the people they're getting in with it and evaluating the economics of the business. That's 99% of the deal. You may run into an environmental liability problem, one time in 100, or you may find a bad lease. I asked Melvin about, do you have any bad leases? I mean, that's the easiest way to do it. And I can read them all and try and look for every clause or something, but it isn't going to. that is not the problem. We've made lots of bad deals. We made a bad deal when we bought Hochschild Kohn, for example, a department store operation back in 1966. But it had fine people, but we were wrong on the economics of the business. But the leases didn't make any difference, or that sort of thing just was not important. And I can't recall any time that what other people refer to as due diligence would have avoided a bad deal for us.
I can't either.
No, that's 30-some years. And the key thing, you just don't want to do. I go into. I'm on various public company boards. I've been on 19 public company boards, and their idea of the due diligence is to send the lawyers out and have a bunch of investment bankers come in and make presentations and all that. And I regard that as terribly diversionary, because the board sits there, entranced by all of that, and everybody reporting how wonderful this thing is and how they've checked out patents and all that sort of thing. And nobody is focusing really on where the business is going to be in 5 or 10 years. And, business judgment about economics and people to some extent, but the business economics, that is 99% of deal making. And the rest, people may do it for their protection. I think too often they do it as a crutch, just to go through with the deal that they want to go through with anyway. And of course, all the professionals know that. So believe me, they come back with the diligence, whether due or not. And we are not big fans of that. I don't know how many deals we've made over the years, but I cannot think of anything that traditional due diligence has had a thing to do with. And
no, we've had surprises on the favorable side a couple of times.
That is true. That is true. The kind of people that we've generally dealt with have usually told us the bad things first and good things after we made the deal. We made a deal with a fellow over in Rockford in 1969, Eugene Abegg, the Illinois National Bank and Trust Company. I made that deal in a couple of hours, and there just wasn't any way that Gene was going to be hiding anything bad. For the next 10 years, when I went over there, every time I go to lunch, he'd point out some building in town that we owned that wasn't on the books, or some foundation we had that had money in it that he hadn't told me about. And he even gave me some bills, one of which I carry in my pocket, that he had still sitting around that were issued by the bank, that were our own money, which he never told me about. We could cut them out like paper dolls. Gene was not a guy to show all his cards. And those are the kind of people we've generally dealt with. And I would certainly say that that Melvin and Shirley fit that description in spades. We're now at 3:30. It's been a lot of fun this weekend. I'm glad you came, and I hope to see you next year. Thank you.